I'm sorry, Michelle.
Oh, you're fine.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go if you are.
Yeah, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, we'll now call to order the December 15th, 2021 Reno City Planning Commission meeting. If Commissioner Draculich, could you lead us in the pledge? To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner. Michelle, will you please do a roll call?
Alex Felto,
Here.
JD Draculich,
Here.
Peter Gower is absent. Mark Johnson,
Here.
Arthur Munoz,
Here.
Sylvia Villanueva,
Here.
Kathleen Taylor is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll now move on to general public comment. This item is for public comment of any action item or for any general public comment. Michelle, did we receive any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive any request to speak forms. I did not receive any voicemails, and I did not receive any correspondence for this item.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make public comment on a general item? Okay, in that case, we will close public comment. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, approval of the minutes. Item 4.1 is Reno City Planning Commission, November 3rd, 2021.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I move to approve the minutes for the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Villanueva. I cannot approve, I was absent for the minutes on November 3rd, so I can't vote on that, but everything else I can second.
Thank you.
Commissioner Draculich, second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving agenda item 4.1?
Aye.
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 Sorry, Commissioner Mitchell, I believe I need to abstain as well. I'm trying to look at my calendar, see if I was here.
You were here. Is this for November 3rd? You were here.
So then I'm good.
Okay, great. The motion carries. We'll now move to item 4.2, meeting minutes for November 18th, 2021.
Again, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, move to approve the minutes from Thursday, November 18th.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Villanueva, I second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Villanueva. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Agenda item 4.3, meeting minutes for the December 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting.
Just for the trifecta, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I'll move to approve the minutes from December 2nd.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Commissioner Villanueva, second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Villanueva. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. Motion carries. We will now move on to public hearings. Agenda item 5.1, case number LDC 22-00024. Do we have a presentation from the applicant?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Prue from Carlots. Thanks for having us here today. I thought I'd just take a minute to introduce Carlots to you since we are new to Reno, and we're a little different than your average used vehicle dealer. So Carlots was founded about 10 years ago with our first store in Richmond, Virginia. Over the course of the last decade, we've grown very deliberately, and at the beginning of this year, we had 8 stores. We went public at the beginning of this year, and We now have 22 stores as of today. So we're growing quickly, and that will continue into next year. And we're hoping to make Reno a part of that growth. So what sets car lots apart from other dealers is we have a consignment model for selling cars. So like CarMax or other dealers, we do sell dealer-owned inventory, but we also sell cars on consignment for individual consumers or for our corporate partners. So what this means is if you bring a car to car lots and pay a fee, we will market that car for you, we'll recondition it, and then you'll be able to access a retail channel for selling your car that you wouldn't otherwise be able to sell through. So this means for sellers, they're able to get more for their cars than if they were to, say, trade them in or sell them to another private party. It also works out for the buyers because they have access to financing, which they couldn't if they were buying directly from another individual. And then the cars are also generally priced slightly below retail, so the cars are sold at a great price, and they've gone through a quality control process and have all passed a state inspection. So it works out well for both the buyers and the sellers. So that's kind of what differentiates us from other dealers, and that's who we are. Are there any questions about our company, or should I just jump straight to what we're planning for this particular site?
The plan would be great. We're gonna get to questions after we hear a presentation from the staff.
Okay. So this slide shows you the site that we're looking at. It's 7063 South Virginia Street. It's been vacant for a while. It's the former Lithia VW. The site's fallen into a state of disrepair over the last several months. We actually have a signed lease and just took possession of the property a few weeks ago. And we've taken some immediate steps to clean it up, as well as address the issue with vagrancy on site and some of the safety issues associated with that. So we've taken some immediate steps, but then our site plan is also intended to bring the site into conformance with city requirements and further improve the site. So this slide shows you the site plan that was submitted as part of our application. And I'll just click ahead to highlight some of the changes here. Those X's show some temporary structures that have actually already been removed from the site in our efforts to do some initial cleanup work. We're also going to be cleaning up and doing some new plantings for the landscaping. So there's a major portion of unpaved area at the north side of the site that we'll be cleaning up and planting, as well as along the street frontage. And then we'll also be adding in landscape islands throughout the parking area where there currently are none. We'll also be cleaning up the building, basically giving it a nice facelift and painting it, which it's in sore need of just because it hasn't really been maintained for quite a while. So that is what we're planning, and I'm happy to answer any questions at all that you have for us.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So typically it's the way we go through this, we have you present, and then we'll hear a presentation from Nathan. We'll then do public comment on the item, and then we'll call you back for questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Happy holidays. For the record, Nathan Gilbert, Senior Planner. This is a request for, it's a conditional use permit to establish an auto dealership on a 4.5 acre site. Subject zoning is mixed use suburban, and it's a master planned suburban mixed use and within a suburban corridor. Key issues in staff analysis were site design and compatibility with surrounding land uses. A little bit of background the applicant touched on. This was the previous Lithia Volkswagen dealership. While it was a previous dealership at one time, their business license has expired past 1 year, and a new conditional use permit is required to establish auto sales on the site. The site is in poor condition and has been for some time and does not currently meet code standards. Site design, site compliance with parking and landscaping standards. The application recommended conditions to bring the site up to current code standards. That would include stormwater control and treatment on site, your low-impact development standards, and new sidewalk, curb, and gutter replacement along South Virginia Street. Conditions, it's auto repair, washing, and detailing would all occur indoors, and the auto repair component of the previous Lithia Volkswagen dealership, the auto repair is limited to inventory on site. And the way the condition is written, if in the future, if broader auto repair uses are anticipated or requested, that they have a site circulation and access plan approved by staff. We received no general public comment on the request. We did have Ward 2 NAB comments supportive of the site improvements and noting past circulation issues for auto repair queuing of the previous Volkswagen site. There's that condition I just went over. Staff can make the applicable findings and recommends approval of the conditional use permit subject to conditions. Staff is available for any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll now open up public comment.
Want to do disclosures
Yes,
first?
moving back to the Commission for Disclosures. We'll start with Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Familiar with the site?
Commissioner Draglich, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Villanueva.
My apologies. This is Sylvia, Commissioner Villanueva, for the record. I visited the site, and I think that's the only disclosure.
Commissioner Munoz, I'm familiar with the site, and I believe I read one email.
Commissioner Gower, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Velto, familiar with the site. Now we will open up for public comment. Michelle, do we receive any request to speak forms?
I did not receive any request to speak forms. I did not receive any voicemails, and I did not receive any correspondence for this item.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions.
Chair, Commissioner Johnson, a quick question, I think for Nathan. Just on the additional landscaping that's going on, obviously there's, as was noted, there's the 20% site landscaping requirement. Is the portion on the north side of the site, is that basically going to need to remain landscaped almost in perpetuity in order to maintain that 20%?
That's correct, and it would need to be code compliant landscape, not the vegetation that's there currently.
Okay, just asking the question, knowing that there's, you know, it appears that they're not using the entire paved area, so just understanding that. So, okay, that was the question I had. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva.
Nathan, this question's for you. Can you actually briefly touch on what those landscaping requirements are?
They're fairly comprehensive. So what the condition of approval recommended is to bring the site up to current code standards. That's a minimum of 20% landscaping on the site. That's street trees 30 feet on center along North Virginia Street with that landscape parkway strip, and then any parking area landscaping required by code that would be required of any new development.
Okay, and so the grass that's there now, does that have to remain there, or does the applicant have option to remove the grass, update it? I mean, it looks pretty.
Well, this, of course, is just a graphic example. Everything's pretty much dead on the site. Yeah,
it's photos. Yeah,
it's dirt.
Okay, can I ask the applicant a question? Is he available? Hi, what do you guys anticipate some of the landscape to look like? I know it's still a preliminary plan, but what are you guys anticipating?
Sure, so we actually submitted a landscape plan showing tree plantings that would meet code requirements. The site's not currently code compliant. So each of the landscape islands you see on the plan would have a tree. There'll be additional trees and shrubs along the frontage, and that large grassy area at the top of the site plan will have quite a bit of plantings in that area as well. I also have our civil engineer here. who can answer any more specific questions you might have in terms of like the specific plantings and that kind of thing.
Do you guys anticipate maybe removing the grass, or is that something you guys plan on keeping moving forward?
It'll depend on, I guess, the requirements of planting the trees and shrubs, with those being the priority. And then obviously we'll want everything around that to be grass and well maintained.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please.
In the case of LDC 22-00024 car lots group, based on compliance with applicable findings, I move to approve the conditional use permit, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and I can meet all the findings.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Commissioner Draculich, I second.
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project. We'll now move to agenda item 5.2, which is LDC 22-00027 North Valley's Commerce Center zoning map amendment. Do we have a presentation from the applicant?
Nathan, where's Andy?
Perhaps we can continue the item, or would you prefer we hear a presentation from Nathan? Nathan, are you prepared to give a presentation? Thank you.
Sure. For the record, Nathan Gilbert, Senior Planner. Our presentations generally overlap, so I think it would be more than sufficient. Michelle, can we pull up the staff presentation, please? Okay. There we go. All right. This is a request for a zoning map amendment on a 256.3 acre site. The actual zone change would include all of that except for a small half acre portion. The request to rezone may be familiar in this area to the commission, going from mixed use suburban to industrial commercial. Key issues in staff analysis are compatibility with the master plan and compatibility with surrounding zoning districts and uses. The North Virginia corridor has a master plan land use designation of industrial. This was assigned with the 2017 Reimagine Reno master plan and is in an employment center portion of the corridor. Applications for rezoning to bring the site into conformance with the master plan are free of charge to streamline conformance under the new code. A subject area is almost entirely built out with existing industrial facilities. The majority of these were built under the previous mixed-use North Virginia Transit Corridor, which with the code update was translated to mixed-use suburban. There's very limited areas particularly in the south east portion of remaining limited development, about 8 acres. Any future development within 300 feet of residentially zoned property would still be subject to discretionary review in both the existing zoning MS zoning district and the proposed industrial commercial zone. We did receive 2 phone calls with general concern with industrial development in the corridor. Staff can make the applicable findings and supports the Planning Commission recommendation to City Council to approve the zoning map amendment. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We'll now come back to the commission for disclosures. Start with Commissioner Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, I was contacted by the applicant, and I'm familiar with the site.
Commissioner Dragish, familiar with the site.
Commissioner Villanueva, no disclosures.
Commissioner Munoz, I'm familiar with the site.
Commissioner Gower, familiar with the site.
Commissioner Velto, I spoke with the applicant's representative, and I'm familiar with the site. We'll now open up public comments. Michelle, are there any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive, any request to speak forms. I did not receive any voicemails. However, we did receive correspondence in opposition. That email was forwarded to the Planning Commission and has been entered into the record.
Thank you, Michelle. Is anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Yes, sir? If you could speak and then fill out a form with Michelle afterwards, but please come to the podium. And state your name for the record, please.
My name is Gino Osborne, and I am a property owner out in that area. We inherited some property from our grandfolks. I just wanted to get a better understanding of what the definition of the various mixed uses versus what it is currently now. I didn't understand that.
I apologize, sir. We're not able to discuss that with you. It's time for you to make public comment, but we're interested in hearing what you have to say about the project.
Okay. From the map, I couldn't really tell what side of old Virginia that they are interested in having change. Can that be made clear?
I think we'll ask the questions of staff after public comment to answer the questions, hopefully, that you're asking. We just can't answer you directly.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. And if you could fill
Mr.
out.
Osborne, could you please fill out a form? Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Johnson?
Mr. Chair, thank you. So Nathan, could you, or I guess, work with Michelle to put the site plan back up and just verify in the discussion, and I'll kind of walk through, if I'm understanding this right myself. So the areas that are outlined in blue on both north and south sides of Virginia Street are part of this request. Now, just to make clear, and I think I heard you say this, that there's no project here. These are all sites that are currently built out. This is basically a request to change the zoning to match the master plan use. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the area highlighted in blue is about 95% built out with existing warehouse and distribution. That wouldn't change anything. The current zoning is mixed-use suburban, and that allows for a variety of industrial uses, including the ones that are currently there. The request is to change to an industrial commercial zoning designation, which allows almost all of the same uses, to bring the entire site inconsistent with the industrial master plan designation.
And then, as you said, there's very little that's not built out here. Is there significant difference between what could be built on the remaining unbuilt parcels under the zone change compared to what could be built on them?
Not significant in terms of uses, but in terms of design. The mixed-use suburban design is more urban oriented.
Okay.
But any future development within 300 feet of any residentially zoned property would require a public hearing.
And just because I know we've had this question come up in that area before, because there's a mix of county and city land in that area, it appears to be residential directly to, I guess in this case would be the east of the site. Is that zoned residential?
The area of Grandview Terrace,
Yes.
so north of North Virginia Street, and to the east of the subject site is zoned residential. Any development, new development within 300 feet of that area would require a public process.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan. I think that answers my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any other questions from the commission? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I'll make a motion. And again, what I'm seeing here is a recommendation basically as a land use. It's not a project. So case number LDC 22-00027, North Valley's Commerce Center zoning map amendment. Based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to recommend that the City Council approve the zoning map amendment by ordinance, and I can make all of the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Munoz, I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Munoz.
Before you call for a vote, just as a point of discussion for the gentleman that was here in the audience, if you do still have any questions, Nathan, could you chat with him afterwards? Nathan here in the front will be able to do that. So, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to agenda item 5.3, case number LDC 22-00029 Lux Locker. Do we have a presentation from the applicant?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Michael Gordon with Lux Locker. I'm one of the principals of Lux Locker. We develop boat and RV storage projects. We're not new to the Reno market necessarily. We just finished one up in Spanish Springs off of the Pyramid Highway. Some of you may have seen that or heard about it. Our product is a little different than most storage. It is designed and geared towards larger personal items, boats, RVs, classic cars, as well as other personal items. But different than most of the storage projects related to that you may be familiar with, ours are fully enclosed units in a gated, secure facility. So there's no outdoor parking, there's no outdoor storage, there's no canopy storage. They're all large individual units. Fully enclosed, automatic garage doors, other amenities for folks to keep their toys, their vehicles in, keep them winterized, keep them in a safe, secure environment. I'll give you a little presentation on who we are and what we do, and a little bit about our case tonight, and then I'll be here to answer questions afterwards. Like I said, we developed, this particular site is on Virginia Street and Panther Drive, right next to or adjacent to the Maverick facility, the Maverick gas station that was built there. It's on about 8.4 acres of land. The main features of our projects, like I said, are larger enclosed storage units. Most of them are 14 to 16 feet wide, 40 to 60, 65 feet deep. Automatic sectional garage doors, fully enclosed, gated, secure, cameras, bathroom showers, sewer cleanouts, dump areas, and we provide that, like I said, in an environment where you can actually own. The other thing we do, we'll talk about this evening, is we sell these and lease these as individual storage condos. So they're part of a commercial owner or commercial owners association, and you can actually purchase that unit rather than just renting it. The location, obviously, in Reno, North Reno on Virginia Street, adjacent to the Maverick, like I mentioned. The surrounding land use is kind of a mix. We have some industrial development directly to the north of us. There's an existing truck facility there. There's an existing storage facility and a mix of other industrial uses. There is some residential in the area, although it is kind of separated from the project. It's across the street, across Virginia Street and across Panther Drive, and set back a little bit. One of the things about our use, typically we've found in other municipalities, it's kind of considered almost a buffer use because of the way it's developed. When you see the renderings, it's not really retail or commercial. It's obviously not residential, but the way it's operated and the way it functions, it just kind of sits there as a nice little buffer between residential, commercial, and industrial. This is the site, obviously on Virginia on the bottom of the screen, Panther Drive wrapping around. Maverick is the shaded area in the bottom right corner. One of the things we'll talk about here in a minute is the alternative compliance. This is one of the elevations that we're working on for this project, trying to create something that has some visual interest to it. It is storage, obviously, but we tend to like to go in and try and fit with the existing environment, both in terms of landscaping as well as the architectural features we put on these projects. a couple elevations that you see here for the project, looking at using different architectural metals, stucco accents, clear story windows, other adornments on the building, as well as enhanced landscaping to help soften the buildings. A couple pictures from some existing facilities of ours, again, fully gated and secure. You can see the sectional garage doors, again, designed for they all have 14-foot tall clear doors, sectional garage doors, operated with either an app or with your remote control, just like you do at your house for your garage door to get through the gate and get into your unit. A couple other pictures. Project team. So anyway, that's a little bit about Lux Locker. I'd be happy to answer more questions about that later. In terms of why we're here tonight, I'm just going to flip back to the site here. We have 3 items in front of you. Obviously, a conditional use permit. This use is an allowed use in the zoning district that we're in, but through a conditional use permit. So we're here before you looking to get approval for that this evening. There were a couple of questions that came up in the neighborhood meeting process, and I wanted to explain about how we operate. Because of what I explained in terms of what this project is, we don't have an office. We don't have office hours. There aren't staff there. There's not a storefront to this at all. You have the gated entrances into the project, and everybody is an owner. So they're coming and going really fairly infrequently because of the nature of what people store in our projects. Your boats, your RVs, your extra cars, your extra personal items. People aren't typically coming and going to their storage unit very often. So our traffic counts tend to be low, and people come and go mainly during the day, although they can come and go 24 hours. But again, we don't have a storefront, so we don't have typical hours. That was a question about hours, and we worked with staff a little bit on one of the conditions to address that. People can come and go 24 hours a day to drop off their stuff. Most people will come and go during the day. The other item we're here today, one of the items is the alternative equivalent compliance. One of the things in the building code for this zoning district, it does call for really more of a storefront application to projects that are built in this zoning district. For us, for this use, obviously, with what I just described, storefront application isn't really applicable. In fact, a lot of storefront windows or glazing and such would actually probably be considered a negative for the project. You obviously don't want to see you don't want the public to see into people's storage units and see their items. That presents some security concerns and other concerns there as well. But also the site doesn't really apply itself very well to create any sort of storefront condition. Part of the site sits extremely above Virginia. Part of it sits extremely below Virginia. All of it sits way up above Panther Drive, tucked up behind the Maverick station there. So when the site's developed, you're really not going to have much of an application for a storefront. And again, because of the type of use that's proposed, it's gated, it's not open to the public. So there really isn't a pedestrian use there, a parking lot there, or anything that would present the need to create that effect. So our request is to do some things that go above and beyond the standard code in terms of the elevations and how we finish the exterior of the building, again, to create that buffer to make it fit within the neighborhood, but do it in a way that's maybe, without all of the glazing, incorporating some of that, but trying to create an aesthetic looking building that fits. That's the second part of our request, and the third part of our request tonight is the tentative map approval. Again, back to what I said before, we do condo these out. To add to some of the conditions that you will see in your report or for the conditional use permit, these are put together into a commercial owners association, so there's a very detailed set of CC&Rs and covenants that are recorded as part of the project and as part of the plat process. So folks that are buying a unit, renting a unit, you have a very strict conditions in there, most of which would address some of the things that may be concerns. You can't operate a business out of your unit. You can't do welding. You can't store hazardous materials. You can't have large gatherings, things of that sort. So the covenants themselves tend to restrict what most concerns are from folks for a project like this. And a few of the conditions that are in the motion tonight also take that, put another layer, I should say, in front of that. So with that, that's why we're here. And again, I'd be happy to answer questions later in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Grace, do we have a presentation?
Yes.
Good evening, Commissioners. Grace Whited, Assistant Planner for the record. He did a great job of kind of giving a summary of their project and the business model, so I'll try to fill in any gaps, and then I'll be available for questions as well. So the subject site is located north of Panther Drive, east of North Virginia Street. The applicant is requesting the approval of a conditional use permit, alternative equivalent compliance, and a tentative map. So kind of as we just discussed, I wanted to break it down since it's a compilation of 3 separate applications, but we're looking at them all together. The conditional use permit is for the development of the mini warehouse facility within 300 feet of residential zoning, business operations between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., and he kind of discussed what that would look like. And then grading with with fills greater than 10 feet in height. The alternative equivalent compliance is to vary from the ground floor transparency standards, and the tentative map is to subdivide 4 parcels into 165 condominiums. Commercial condominiums. The proposed mini warehouse is compatible with the area and consistent with the industrial nature that we see here already. As you can see, the site is surrounded by industrial zoning, and that single family or residential zoning is separated by Panther Drive as well as the railroad. So it provides some sort of a built-in buffer. The alternative equivalent compliance is new with our zoning code update. I think you guys have only seen one. And so our transparency standards require 25% of transparency for all frontages. Kind of as he talked about the nature of this business, storing people's personal items, the transparency doesn't make a lot of sense for them to meet. And so they propose some alternative design elements to help with the architectural aspects of it while not meeting the letter of the code. So this this elevation kind of shows the unique elements that they plan on using. The tentative map is for 165 commercial condominium units, and these would be available for individual sale or for lease. We recommended some conditions in the staff report that would restrict activities. I think this product is a little different from many warehouse uses that we see in the city. And so the code restricts these uses, and then the conditions are on top of that would also restrict activities. So I wanted to highlight the additional use standards that are already in code. So they are going to be a mini warehouse. That's what their license will be for. And so in code, when you apply for a mini warehouse or you build one, these are the additional use standards you have to meet. And so that is built in. It does not have to be conditioned. It's already code. And so if any activities outside of those were to be seen on site or anyone were to complain about something like that, they would be in violation. And then if a business license were applied for some sort of business on site, they would be denied because it wouldn't meet the mini warehouse additional use standards. This is a Google Street image from the north end of the site, so the old part of Panther Drive. And it kind of shows how far they are from those single family homes and then the industrial nature of that area. So because there's so many applications tonight, I didn't want to list them all out for you, but I wanted to show each application type and that staff was able to make all of the applicable findings. That concludes my presentation. I'll leave you with the recommended motion, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. We'll come back to the commission for disclosures. Commissioner Gower.
Thank you. Commissioner Gower, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Munoz, I'm also familiar with the site.
Commissioner Villanueva, no disclosures.
Commissioner Velto, I visited the site.
Commissioner Dracula, same disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures.
Okay, we'll now open it up to public comment. Michelle, are there any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive any request to speak forms, no voicemails, and no correspondence for this item.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Dracula.
Yes, sir.
Question for Grace. have a pretty good sense of where we're going with this in regards to the alternative equivalent compliance. Do we feel like that ever sets a precedence that the city's worried about with future applications?
So we do have this as an option. It's not necessarily a variance. A variance is completely deviating from code, and you have to show some sort of a hardship. So the idea with the alternative equivalent compliance is you have to show that you're meeting the intent of code or going above and beyond in some aspects like articulation or design or enhanced landscaping to justify that you can't meet one portion of the code. And so I believe the previous alternative equivalent compliance you saw was for transparency as well. And because it takes a discretionary review, I don't think it would set a precedent because we'll be looking at each one of these individually on a case-by-case basis.
Figured as much, and that makes sense. So obviously it's case by case, and you guys obviously are confident with what they've done to change the transparency standard.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just follow up on that just real quick, Grace? Is that a requirement for both the Virginia Street and the Panther Drive storefronts or frontages?
Yes, there is a requirement for 40% for certain street frontages, and so I believe that might be the Virginia Street side. So either way, they would have to vary from in some way. It's 40% or 25 on all other street frontages.
Thank you.
Commissioner, this is going to be for you as well. A couple months ago, we approved a subdivision that's going to go in just south of the railroad tracks there in the kind of triangle area below the warehouse right there. Is this going to have any effect on that going forward?
It should not.
Okay, and then also the 2 residences on the property, and this probably be for the applicant, are those going to be vacated? Are they vacated now, or what's the process with that going on?
The applicant can speak to if they're vacated now. Obviously, those would have to be demolished, and we discussed that during the review. Are they vacant?
Yes, they are vacant and will be going.
They are vacant now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Villanueva. So it looks like we're also reviewing grading with fills greater than 10 feet. And so
Sylvia, can you bring the microphone down? Thank you.
Sure. So it looks like we're reviewing grading with fills greater than 10 feet. And I'm looking at this online on Google, and it looks like there's some hills. So I could be looking at the wrong area. Can you actually just pull up the Google image that you have? Yeah, so that looks pretty flat. So what's on the other side? Are there some serious hills there? Because I'm concerned about cuts, but it doesn't say that there are going to be cuts in this application.
So our trigger for cuts is 20 feet. They did not exceed that trigger. They only exceeded the 10 feet of fills. And maybe this picture is a little misleading because it is a fairly hilly site. If you go to the Panther Drive right here, if you can see my cursor, it is uphill. You'll see an uphill to the site. And then the Maverick is off the screen over here, and there's some significant hills over here as well.
Okay, but there's not going to be any cutting greater than
20
feet.
Nope.
Okay.
If they were to cut, they would have to come back and either amend this or come back for another review.
And it says the fills are greater than 10 feet. So do we know how great? Does it say that in here? I didn't see it.
Yes. I think it's 12 is the max of 16.46 feet. It does not exceed.
It does not exceed, okay.
Correct.
Okay, and that's just to level it out?
Yes.
Okay, that's all my questions for right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Grace, with the tentative map in this use where it's being essentially parceled out into individual units, what happens, down the road if this owner decides to close this business type, and it changes, the next owner wants it to be, a similar use, a storage unit, but not necessarily parceled out in the same way, what is the procedure at that point to essentially roll back what we're talking about with splitting it out,
So they could do a reversion to acreage, which is a parcel or, a mapping review. And they would just come back in for a administrative review at that point, and it would have to obviously get re-recorded with the county. And if any other business model came in, they'd have to get a new business license, and they would have to go through the appropriate channels to get approved.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. Grace, question to go back to Commissioner Villanueva's line about grading and the fills. And you can this may have to go back to the applicant as well, but the side between the building and Panther Drive is, as mentioned, there's a pretty significant grade change there. It looks like from the grading plan, it's all at a 3-to-1 slope. Is there some specific treatment, or is there anticipated any retaining walls or anything in that area?
So they will be using some retaining walls in conjunction with their grading, but no, from what I understand, I don't believe they'll be stepping the buildings at all. So mostly retaining walls.
Okay, because and maybe have the applicant come up and check on this, because I'm not seeing anything on the site plan for retaining walls, so you can, unless they're part of, I guess they're part of the building, is that what I'm seeing on the corners?
Yeah, typically they're part of the building. Can we go back to the actual site plan? I can probably describe it a little bit better. Okay. So there is, and it's deceiving in the photo, but those of you that have been out there, there is significant grade change kind of in all directions on this site. Like I mentioned on Virginia Street, some of the sites above, some of it's below Virginia Street. The top of the screen.
You can use the mouse as a pointer.
Gotcha. Thank you. Up here along Panther Drive, it sits significantly lower than most of the site. So just backing up briefly, and then I'll answer your question. The cuts that don't exceed 20 feet primarily are happening up here on top of the hill, which is well above Maverick, and it kind of levels this portion of the site out. Right now, the site slopes pretty quickly down to Panther Drive. So the fills that are in excess of 10 feet are in that 10 to, I think you said 16 at the max. And that's basically layering this. So this is one level, this is a middle level, and this is a lower level. And it just kind of steps its way down the hill rather than right now it all kind of falls off pretty aggressively. In terms of retaining walls, most of what we do with retaining walls are on like the corners of the buildings. The building foundation wall will actually drop, not significantly, but we'll use anywhere typically from 2 to 6 feet to help transition that, and then go to those 3-to-1 slopes to tie down to like the stormwater and retention areas and landscape areas. I'm not exactly sure what code requires for what has to go on a slope that's 3-to-1. Obviously, we'll follow city code in terms of that, but we'll do what we need to do to stabilize those properly.
Okay, thank you. I think seeing that it was part of the building was the main question on the retaining wall.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I do have a couple other quick questions for you. The entrance on I get flipped around here, the entrance off of Panther Drive. So the main entrance appears to be, yes, that one to the right there.
Yeah,
That's the one that requires a dedicated left-hand turn lane
correct.
to be included. Now, is the other entrance, is it gated for emergency access only, or is that anticipated to have the same level of access for the people within the?
It's anticipated to have the same level of access. Most will utilize this. Typically what we'd see is most people will come in, on the easier access off of the primary street. But a lot of times if you are in this portion of the facility, it'll be easier to exit on the secondary street to leave. So people will come and go from both. Primarily, we tend to see people enter on this primary, exit, and then go obviously left or right on Panther, depending upon what direction they're trying to go. But both will be gated and allowed to go out both directions. Yeah, we will be adding that center turn lane. The street is, from what we understand, already wide enough for that. It just doesn't have the striping past Maverick to accommodate that. So we'll be striping and creating that stacking distance in that turn lane. The gate is actually, then there's a little incline, and so the gate into the facility will actually be up on the flat a little ways off, so there's lots of stacking distance back to Panther Drive.
Okay, that was led into that question, so.
Okay.
And then I have one more question for you, and this is going back to the alternative equivalent compliance. One of the issues that I have with this building type is the fact that it, even with the ins and outs, is it's a very flat building elevation. And one of the nice things about when you incorporate glazing into that, typically the glazing provides not only a horizontal relief line, but a shadow line. And that's something that I'm not seeing. And I guess I would put out as a comment that in just changing the patterns horizontally or additional landscaping, to me, that's not the visual thing that we're going for. I think we're going for a little bit of, to me, there's some interest that comes with the shadow lines and what you see, as the day goes by.
Sure.
So my comment on this, and I'll defer this to discussion, but I would like to see some type of horizontal element on there that would allow for a shadow line to happen. Whether it's above the clear stories that you've already got, so you can save, do something there, or some kind of banding that you would wrap around that ties into the architecture elsewhere.
Sure.
Because I think that's the one thing that is missing from the way that it's presented here.
Sure.
So I guess my question to you is that something that you would consider? Obviously, this is something we would have to discuss up here, but
Yeah.
I would ask that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some things in the past with parapets and other projections, and parapets are vertical, but other projections horizontally as well. I'm not opposed to that as long as it's within reason in terms of how much.
And we would, I would work with Grace, but just the discussion here and looking at those elevations, and that was why I was asking if it was both frontages. You've demonstrated some clear story windows, even adding just one of those, you see them all over the place. It's a metal shading element
awning, yeah.
over the windows, some
Sure.
kind of awning that just gives some horizontal relief,
Depth,
depth
yeah.
from the building in addition to vertical. So
Yeah.
obviously we'll have a discussion. That would be an additional condition as a description for it. I just wanted to get a sense from you if that was something that you as the applicant would be willing to accept as an additional condition on the project.
Yeah, I would be open to that, again, as long as it's within reason in terms of how much is requested. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Munoz?
Hey, Commissioner Moons, this will be for the applicant as well. I do have some concerns. This is actually a daily stop of mine there at Maverick before I head off to work. And getting out of the driveway, turning left back towards Virginia, it is kind of difficult or can be a challenge pulling out of there because of that blind corner. How far back is the fence or the gate going to be located? Do you feel like that's going to inhibit or make it harder to see cars coming around that corner at all? Or has that been taken into any consideration?
Yeah, we did look at that in terms of the visibility around the corner. The gate is back, I don't know the exact distance, but it's probably 125 plus feet back from Virginia.
Okay, so
So
you can
the
still see
gate
that
and the
corner.
fencing, yes, coming and going, you'll still see very well off both corners. And again, the other thing that helps that is you're coming off of Virginia uphill, so as you're coming back down and you're trying to get that visual, you are going to be looking down and to both directions. So coming out of the facility particularly, I think you'll have good visibility in both directions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Thank you, Chairman. I have similar concerns to my colleague over here, Commissioner Johnson, regarding just aesthetics and how that's gonna look in the area, and then also with the grading. And so, am I crazy? Anyone else have similar concerns regarding that? Especially given the hills that are in that area. So.
I guess we can move into the full discussion if that's, does anyone have any discussion on that?
I was going to ask if that was a lead into discussion. Or,
Oh, yeah, I guess I should have waited for you to.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to that, I'm looking at the condition, or excuse me, the finding 1 under the alternative equivalent compliance achieves the intent of the subject standard to same or better degree. A lot of times have to defer to Commissioner Johnson on these and to staff for their interpretations of what is the same or better. I guess would like to hear what Commissioner Johnson has to say on that to follow up on the questioning of the applicant, and maybe we can have a little bit more conversation on it to answer your question, Commissioner Villanueva.
Thank you.
Like the way like every head swiveled towards me when Commissioner Gower said that. It's like nice. I appreciate the discussion. I do actually think that, I'm looking at the elevation that's proposed, and the applicant working with staff, I'm assuming, has provided more interest than you would have to do. You think about storage units around town, and how many metal building storage units have we seen, or just straight masonry wall units have we seen? The elevation that I'm seeing here is broken up. There is some shifting of the walls, and there's shifting of material, and they're even proposing, between the material change and even some vertical planting on the wall, I think it's going to raise the level that we would be hoping for. The reason I bring up the horizontal part of it is because there's that last little bit that when we see. The reason for asking for that transparency is that it kind of gives all kinds of different visual interest that's not static, whether it's what's happening behind the glass, whether it's reflected on the glass, or like I said, often there's a recess because the glass doesn't want to have water dripping down on it. So my reason for bringing up some level of horizontal projection was to try to create that, and it's it sounds kind of architectural and wonky, but when you see a shadow moving across the building, you kind of have a sense of what time of day it is. It changes during the day. It makes, that combined with the different materials that they're proposing gives the building a little bit of, less of that static appearance that you would get, or that you're trying to get with the glazing. So the reason for asking for that was to try to get there. And in looking at the elevation and to the applicant's comment in terms of within reason, what I'm looking at on that elevation is maybe a comparative amount horizontally that they have of windows. There's clear story windows on here in a portion of the elevation. If there was some horizontal projection, whether it's aligned with those windows or in sort of the same lineal footage of those windows, I think that's what, to me, would start to break up and really bring that elevation to that level or above what we're asking for in code. So to answer your question, I think they're halfway there. If we could add a requirement that there is some horizontal extension from the building in the amount of the windows as a part of the development to meet that requirement, I would be good with what they're proposing to do.
That's helpful.
I think I'm a little bit confused on what exactly the product is, and I understand exactly everything they said, but going through and reading what the city's saying, they're talking about changing the level of, or adding students to the schools by this. I know there's bathrooms and showers in the places. So maybe I gotta ask the applicant or staff, is this anticipated to bring in people living there? Is there gonna be occupancy there?
No, it's strictly prohibited.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what you're referring to, that we get comments from Washoe County School District, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And they just give us kind of a stock comment as far as what their capacities are, but we would.
Okay, if there's no plan to.
No plans for anyone to live here.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Draculich. Thank you, Commissioner Munoz. I was going to ask that before we kind of slid right into general discussion, but I guess I was confusing for just a moment seeing that in the packet. But I feel like they explained themselves pretty well. And obviously, the code is for mini warehouse, as you had that slide up earlier, and we're calling them commercial condominiums, which I get. So thanks for bringing it up.
Commissioner Johnson, do you have?
Go ahead. You can ask me a question. I was just going to respond to the second question that Commissioner Villanueva had with respect to grading, but if you wanted to go back to my initial comment, I can do that first.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that. Do you have proposed language for a condition that maybe we could present to the applicant? And
This is where I always love to get staff involved, but basically, I think as in response to the requirements for alternative compliance, I would request that there would be some horizontal projection off of the existing building wall in a lineal footage equivalent to the clear story windows that they're proposing on that elevation. And I would request that to occur on both I believe it's the north and south sides. I get a little confused by how that goes, but it appears to be both the 395 elevation and the Panther Drive elevation. And I would look to Grace or legal to make sure that you guys could massage that in a way. And I don't want to define materials. I don't want to define, I would just like it to be, and I guess I would say that it needs to be at least solid or perforated, not just a beam sticking off, but something that would create a shadow line.
Yeah, so we could, I was kind of scrambling to write it as you were saying it, horizontal articulation or a projection in an amount equal to the linear footage of the clear story windows. And so that way it would provide kind of what you're looking for with some sort of leniency as to materials once they get to building permit. I'm comfortable with that, and we can just see. I'm comfortable with that. Okay.
So that would be the language I'd be looking for. Massaged by staff to make sure that it reads correctly.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear the rest of what you were going to say, because I am curious, because it's such a pretty area. I mean, it's pretty empty now, and I know one of the aspects is that we were reviewing is whether it really fits in with the surrounding area. And aesthetically, it's going to be a bunch of not brick, but concrete walls with not a lot of windows and just kind of in this pretty space. And yeah, I think we need some aesthetics, but go ahead.
I think aesthetically, that was my initial discussion. I think that the grading, it's a challenging site because it's grading in multiple directions and it's surrounded by roads on all four sides. So it's a single site that has to respond to the grades all the way around it. I think what they've done in looking at it is attempting to sort of balance by cutting in one direction and filling in the other direction. I do have some concerns, and that was what I was addressing, about how close that fill is getting to Panther Drive on the south side. And because when you have a 3-to-1 slope, it limits what you can plant on it. So the idea that there's going to be sort of an extension of the building coming down as a retaining wall to minimize that slope down, I think what you end up with visually is going to be a taller building that's articulated in the way that they're expressing it here, with a level of sort of slope planting going on there. And to me, I think that is, short of requiring excessive setbacks, which we don't want to do in this situation, or we can't. I mean, they're allowed by code. I do think that they are approaching the grading in a way that makes sense for the site. I do also appreciate the fact that their detention basin does take up a large portion of the frontage closest to the Panther Drive and 395 interchange. So basically, you come around that corner where the Maverick is, you don't hit a wall of buildings. That's the landscaped area, protects the visibility that Commissioner Munoz was speaking of, and it's not until you come all the way around the corner where you're actually seeing that development that's happening sort of above you. And as the road continues down, that's going to be a little bit less of a visual impact. So to maybe go back to the sort of aesthetics and grading question, I think what's happening here, while it may be a little more intrusive on that south elevation, I think it's an attempt to soften that. And I think what they're doing on the other side towards 395 makes a lot of sense, kind of cutting and dropping it down. So that's the way I'm interpreting the site plan, the grading plan, and the way that it's been explained to me. And that's how I'm looking at the findings for that, the fill that they're asking us to
Yeah, that puts me at ease a lot because I was pretty concerned here. So, all right, thank you for that discussion.
I feel like I'm in Architecture 101 today. It's killing me.
Well, that's why I'm glad we have an architect on it.
So I guess just to wrap up my statements for both of those, based on the additional condition that I'm speaking about, I am able to make the findings for that alternative compliance, which I think was the biggest one I had coming in. I also appreciate the discussions about some of the circulation. I actually think having the secondary access on the backside is a good thing. I think it's going to reduce traffic, and some of these bigger elements that they're bringing out, people with a trailered boat or something could pull out there and have the ability to actually get around the corner and up to speed if they want to get onto Virginia Street on that side of the project, as opposed to having to come out that front gate right there by the Maverick. So I do think that is actually a better situation than what I thought it was if it's emergency gated access. So those are my thoughts. Love to hear if anybody else has any comments.
I think it's most appropriate for you to make the motion.
Only if there's no additional comments. I'd suck the air out of the room.
No, I appreciate all your input and insight in this.
All right. Mr. Chair, in the case of LDC 22-00029, Lux Locker, based upon compliance with the applicable findings and with the addition of a condition for the horizontal projection, I move to approve the conditional use permit, alternative equivalent compliance, and tentative map, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and with the addition of that condition presented, I can make all of the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Munoz, I'll second.
Commissioner Munoz, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 5.4, which is case number LDC 22-00025, Daybreak PUD Area 20C. Do we have a presentation?
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Andy Derling with Wood Rogers, representing the tentative map for Village 20C of Daybreak. Just a little bit of background. I know we have a few new faces. Daybreak is a approved plan unit development. It was finally approved in the summer of last year. It allows for just under 4,000 units, 3,995 units. 815 of those have been approved to date, which really consists of what we've called the east side, so villages 24 through 26, which were traditional kind of single-family detached lots that you would see in the South Meadows, Demonte Ranch area. And then villages 18 and 19 in what we have referred to as the town center. The town center does represent more of that missing middle product type. We talked a lot when Daybreak was going through the approval process that a majority of the units within Daybreak were going to hit that missing middle product type. And what you're seeing is kind of the manifestation of that coming forward by way of these tentative maps. Daybreak in total has about 36% of it consisting of open space, which is passive open space, parks, wetlands, and the flood storage area. It does reestablish the historic Thomas Creek path, which is coming through here, as you can see on the exhibit. 25% more flood storage is being provided here above what's required by code. Oops. And this is a multimodal community design in the handbook itself, and what you'll see in some of the presentation that we'll provide here. There's multi-use paths along the roadways, bike paths on the roadways as well. So there's multiple ways, path connectivity to Veterans Parkway pathways. So we really tried to make this a very extra multimodal community in order to provide those other choices for modes of transportation. Presented tonight, we do have two, so you'll see on some of these exhibits we kind of blurred in between them, but the one that's before you right now is Village 20C. It's kind of located centrally on the west side of the town center. Consists of 65 lots. So in the PUD, Village 20C, which is on the bottom here, is in the mixed neighborhood designation, which allows for a mix of different product types. We do have some ability in the handbook to kind of push and pull some of those land use categories. And so what we have here in the table showing that we're modifying just very slightly. You'll see a little bit of just on the east side of the property up against Veterans Parkway, the open space gets modified a little bit. And it ultimately, has a little bit more open space. Ultimately, that's what is going to be proposed. This portion does have to stand on its own. So the backbone roadways of Taos Valley, the extension of Echo Valley Parkway here, is shown in the tentative map. So that would have to be constructed to serve this property or this subdivision. With that, in accordance with the traffic study that was submitted with the PUD, there is a traffic signal that would be installed with that first extension of the roadway. So that roadway is in final design right now, and we're looking to submit that after the first of the year. So that would serve not just this subdivision, but those previously approved tentative maps in villages 18 and 19 as well. As I mentioned before, the roadway section through here, you've got a shared use multi-use path on the one side, bike lanes, as well as sidewalk on the other side as well. So multiple ways for, whether it's moms and dads with their kids on the bike or more the adamant cyclist, they have opportunities to, have a space within the community. Just some of the technical background on this. Portions of this site are within FEMA floodplain. That conditional letter of map revision, the CLOMAR, has been submitted to the city and as well as FEMA, and that would, per the conditions, have to be approved prior to any of the grading activities. There are also some wetlands that would be disturbed with the overall development, not necessarily with this village. And that 404 permit has been going through the process and is in with the Army Corps right now and in its final stages of approval. So just to kind of wrap up, this is Village 20C, 65 lots. It is single family detached, but they are a small lot product. So it's about a 3,400 square foot average lot size, typical lot size. So those are, by virtue of just the lot size themselves, the homes become smaller and hits that missing middle of being able to provide those smaller housing products in order to hit that market segment. And with that, we are in agreement with all the staff recommendations and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andy. We have a presentation.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. Once again, to go over this, the overall site of Daybreak is approximately 980 acres, with approximately a third of that being in open space. The current project site that we're looking at tonight is 14.7 acres of that overall. The request is for a tentative map to establish those 65 single-family detached dwelling units. Our zoning is that Daybreak PUD. So when we look at this, as we look with our zoning, we initially look at that PUD handbook that establishes all our standards and requirements. If those are not addressed within that, we default to our RMC code and review under our Reno Municipal Code. The net proposal here is 11 dwelling units per acre. This is a unique area in that we actually have minimums required in this area. That is in part from this Planning Commission and the comments and input that were given through the original approval. They do require 8 dwelling units per acre on this. So if we look at that 11 dwelling units per acre, that's comparable to our single family 11, right? Which is a high density detached product. Down on the bottom, you can just see quickly a number count of what we've approved. As Andy went through, there's a number of tentative maps that have been before this commission and have been approved. We have 2 more tonight. So there's approximately 3,006 units left in this out of the total 3,995. The map to the left, we're looking at the upper yellow site. Andy showed you the overall daybreak. This is showing you what we have approved today on the tentative map. Additionally, this is showing that overall sort of trail network that Andy referenced. We have the large regional trail, our sidewalks, bike connectivity, all of that. That was a very important element of the daybreak PUD. We have the current site plan to the left, a standard lot layout, 2 access points coming off the main Taos Road, they're calling it, which is the extension of Echo Valley Parkway. As we look through this, we run through the Daybreak Handbook. We look at that general site design and architecture. There are architecture design standards within that PUD that clearly define the architect, how that will look, and that compatibility with those surrounding neighborhoods as they come in. Traffic access and circulation, as I mentioned, we're coming off that extension of Echo Valley Parkway, and as the thresholds and the initial traffic studies will indicate, we will anticipate a signalized intersection at Steamboat Meadows Parkway and Echo Valley Parkway. So that will, as we see that development come forward, we'd anticipate those improvements happening there. We did receive 1 letter after the publication of this staff report. The main concern of that was traffic. Staff is continuing to reviewing traffic. We have the initial study, and we'll review as each one coming in to make sure that we're constantly regulating that traffic as it comes through. The provision of utilities and services, that's kind of coming in 2 parts. Also, our phasing of infrastructure. So each tentative map per our code needs to be able to stand alone. We now have several tentative maps out there. So when everyone comes in first, they need to build that backway roadway infrastructure and that. So each unit has to be able to stand independently on that. Environmental and cultural. As those of you who are here, this is a very, there's a lot of different concerns and things going on this site. So we have conditions related to flooding. As Andy mentioned, that Clomar and Lomar are currently in process through FEMA, will have to be approved prior to any grading development. We have a 404 permit. That is a jurisdictional wetlands on the site, and that's a permit by the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers that lets them alter and reestablish that. So as I mentioned, they're reestablishing Thomas Creek to more of a traditional or historic alignment, and along that with the wetlands associated with that. The other one on this site is the big one, it's Mercury. That was originally under the Nevada Environmental Protection. The state has given that authority, as was mentioned in the staff report, over to Washoe County Health. Washoe County Health, staff has worked with the Washoe County Health and will continue to work with them and the applicant as we move for this to ensure that we have an approved remediation plan prior to any grading happening out there. That is one of the conditions that you did see. That's unique. It should be noted that the Washoe County standards are higher. There was an approved remediation plan with the PUD from the state. The Washoe County standards for arsenic, mercury are higher than the state levels, and so we'll see additional mitigation and other things coming in, and further protection and insurance that we're protecting the citizens of Reno. Last, we looked at that master plan conformance. As many of you know, the PUD itself is all structured around the current master plan. That's the Reimagine Reno master plan. So our current master plan, we really use that as our guideline to move forward and establish the PUD handbook. So with that, staff recommends approval of the tentative map based on compliance with the applicable findings and subject to the condition listed in the staff report. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Brooke. Now move to the Commission for Disclosures. Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am familiar with the site from previous visits and received communication from the applicant's representative, but we didn't really communicate about the project beyond that.
Commissioner Mooney, so I'm familiar with the site from previous visits as well.
Commissioner Villanueva, I visited the site this afternoon with all the snow and kind of getting there, the water in the wetlands. So no other, actually emails. I also read emails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Draculich, familiar with the site and read and received emails about this in the entirety of the project.
Commissioner Johnson, same disclosures, and had some correspondence with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Velto, same disclosures as Commissioner Johnson. We'll now open up public comment. Michelle, have there been any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive any requests to speak forms. I did not receive voicemail. We did receive correspondence in opposition of this project. That comment was forwarded to the Planning Commission and has been entered into the record.
Thank you. Would anyone in the public like to speak on this item? Okay, hearing none, we'll close public comment. Move back to the commission for questions. Would anyone like to get us started?
I have questions. Commissioner Villanueva, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
For the actually, you know what? Why don't you both come up here because I may have questions for the two of you. Will you pull up the map for me, please?
Would you rather have staff's, this may be better. We'll start here and then you can tell us where you'd like to go.
Actually, pull up the one with the layout, the tentative map. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the word, the wetlands right along the side. What kind of flora and fauna is going to be in that area along the wetlands?
Sure, it's one of the conditions that is in there. There is a noxious weed that's part of our code, but that we haven't, we've actually strengthened that through staff that they'll have to establish all new native plants and native landscape in those open space areas. Additionally, the Army Corps of Engineers will establish a plan and a reseeding and plugging plan that would be native sedges, grasses, other wetland plants associated.
Okay, so there's a noxious weed. So invasive is that the same as invasive? What do you mean by noxious?
Noxious is defined by the state of Nevada. It's very specific of what plants they are. They will have to go through to do an inventory, remove all those prior, make sure that we're not getting those into our grading stock or moving them off-site. There's a number of things established through the state. They'll have a noxious weed management plan. So that we can monitor that and ensure that we are preventing this, not only noxious weeds on the site, but the spread of noxious weeds.
Okay, so why wouldn't we just keep, I understand the noxious weed part, but why wouldn't we just keep it in its natural state with the?
So this was historically has been agricultural land. It's been disturbed through those agricultural uses. What we see is invasives, noxious, other plants coming in there. What we'd like to do is restore that to more of a natural and native system that works and functions more properly for our environment. And the big part is removing those invasive and noxious that we're seeing in many of those open space areas.
Okay, and where's the open space other than that? So that's really the only open space in this project?
Yeah, on this particular, this is only 14.7 acres of 980. So there's 367. Those are hillsides, we have floodplains, we have wetlands, we have river environments. So there's a number of different open space areas associated with the overall Daybreak project.
Okay, and then I have a question for the applicant. The process with FEMA, what does that look like? When you guys have to submit that letter to FEMA, can you describe what that would look like?
Sure. So there's a couple different layers to the floodplain management portion of the project. And sorry, for the record, Andy Durling with Wood Rogers. So the FEMA portion is a conditional letter of map revision. So basically this is, kind of wide and flat area right now. It'll be developed in very similar fashion to what you see south of this in Damani Ranch, Bella Vista, Cyan, South Meadows, Double Diamond, right? Very similar kind of geographic and topographic conditions before that was built. And so what the condition of the CLOMAR is a submittal to FEMA as well as the city of Reno. So it demonstrates the grading that would take place in order to build the project and the offset of how to mitigate the floodwaters due to that grading. And so FEMA regulates to a 100-year floodplain. And so what we have been doing is modeling that based on the Truckee River Flood Management Authority's most recent modeling efforts that were over the last year or two, that they've been working on an updated model for the whole Truckee Meadows. So we're basing that new model for our project off of their existing model for the entire Truckee Meadows.
How do you guys reconcile the mitigation for flooding and then the mitigation for ecosystems and like environmental? How do you
Totally
guys-
different. Yeah, so
But don't
FEMA,
they kind of work together?
They do, and so they do, and so the ecological portion of it is really regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's part of that 404 permit. So the Army Corps is also looking at that CLOMAR as well to see kind of where there's water going to be provided, again, in a flood, not necessarily on a regular basis. The Army Corps really is interested in, I'm overly simplifying, so forgive me, but generally looking at, kind of those ordinary waters that are constantly flowing, not just the floodwaters. So as Brooke got to, you had asked the question, what you're seeing here is not necessarily, it's not mitigated wetlands. This is kind of formal landscaping areas. The mitigated wetlands are mostly to the north of this project, or this little portion of the project. As I mentioned in my presentation, this helps. So this is the existing condition that's out there, and I'm just giving you kind of some flavor here. So Alexander Lake had a small dam. It was dammed up for stock water, for the ranching activities. So they would dam up water there in order to use that throughout, the summer months in order to irrigate their pastures. So it was a man-made facility. It wasn't natural. We have decommissioned that dam that's been taken out, and then we will be reintroducing this through that same area, what is basically a new stream course. Thomas Creek, or the North Fork of Thomas Creek, comes into the property and fed that lake. Now you're going to have an actual stream environment with the mitigated wetlands next to that, so it provides a higher quality water resource than what's out there right now.
And how's that maintained? Is that an HOA?
There would be a drainage district that would be established to maintain that. There's also an HOA. There's going to be two different associations that would be created. So there's a drainage association, which is similar again to what is in Damani Ranch. So Damani Ranch has a lot of mitigated wetlands and open water and things like that that are managed by that drainage district.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Brooke. So you talked a little bit about traffic during your presentation, and that staff is looking at that as these tentative maps come in. I mean, obviously you looked at the baseline traffic study when we did the handbook, and you're using that as a reference point in traffic generation or trip generation from these tentative maps. How does staff look at cumulative traffic conditions in the area? And maybe you can give just an update on the RTC's South Meadows study as it relates to this particular tentative map, and just how staff is evaluating all of those pieces that go into understanding traffic conditions, which are perceptibly more congested in this area recently.
Certainly, and I'll go as far as I'm comfortable as a planner, and if you want a little bit more detail, we'll talk to engineering. So, as I mentioned, through the initial PUD, the overall traffic was looked at. This is 980 acres. There's 2 sites coming off Veterans. We're seeing access coming off Steamboat. We have access coming off Rio Poco. So there's several access points that are coming to this site as we see it overall develop. With each tentative map, we're looking at the traffic that would be generated with each traffic map. With that initial study, we have sort of key points or indicators that provide staff the point that we kick in these, what we would call offsite improvements. Many of these are not on the site. They are on roadways or other things, public right-of-ways that they need to do improvements to so that their project is accommodated in that. And so with these particular ones, what we're seeing is that Echo Valley Steamboat Parkway signalized intersection. So that's the point that we're monitoring right now, is when is that going to happen, right? At what point does that need to happen? Engineering is continuing to watch that and do that. As long as the larger RTC study, I believe that study is still underway, about to be completed. Obviously, as that comes in, that's new information we need to incorporate, and as new studies come in, we'll either look that the overall study is updated to make sure that we're accommodating, and then as each study comes in, we'll make sure that we're meeting that.
So to that point, when that new information becomes available, hopefully soon, how does that affect staff's and this commission and city council's decision-making that's already been made on the PUD itself, but also on these tentative maps? If we have a better understanding of traffic flow and traffic conditions now and in the future, is there an ability to essentially make, I don't want to say retroactive adjustments, but, adjust the PUD, for example, that then subsequently applies to these tentative maps? I mean, how does that work? So we're not just perpetuating an issue that we didn't really know about until, wow, we got this study and say, wait a second, wow, there's conditions might be a little worse than we thought.
I understand your concern. I mean, what we have now is made on the best information that was available at the time we made it, right? And so these are the best decisions. Obviously, new studies coming out, we need to incorporate those, right? So we will, as that comes out, our engineering staff, our traffic engineering will be reviewing that, looking at how it impacts different areas, specifically as we see future requests coming in on this, which there's anticipating several future requests. Those will be accommodated, and then we will kind of back retro, I would gather, to some extent, what we have done in the past to make sure we're coming into conformance with what we anticipate and what current studies are showing.
Okay. There's one more question in there, but I can't quite formulate it. So I'm going to pause there, pass it back to the chair. Thanks, Brooke, for talking through that with me.
Brooke, while you're up here, if I could ask you a question about the traffic issue. So the Daybreak PUD included a master plan or master traffic study. Did that contemplate there being 65 units at this location, or?
So that traffic study is actually contemplating, I believe it was almost 1,000 more units. So through the process of approval of the Daybreak PUD, we actually there were about 1,000 units that were cut back. It became a less dense than what was originally seen when this came through. That traffic study was taken at that higher density. And so as we're seeing, we're looking that we really haven't hit those thresholds because of that reduced density through the approval process.
And is there anything about this project that you think would uniquely intensify traffic beyond what was already studied?
I think this is a unique location, right? We saw Veterans coming in, being a major arterial roadway. We have Steamboat coming in there. We have the extension of Rio Wrangler coming down. Yes, all development's going to increase traffic, but we also have the infrastructure sort of in place to start to accommodate that with these additional concessions that we're seeing provided through the traffic study and offsite concessions.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Villanueva?
I have a question for the planner. Thank you. So we know that the PUD's already been approved, and that's the case. We're looking at these project by project. Obviously, I wasn't here for any of that stuff, for any of the approvals or anything that came before. But I mean, nevertheless, I still have concerns with things like Mercury and the wetlands. Is there anything that and maybe this is the case already, because these are going to be homes. So for purposes of a health and safety, I mean, individuals who are interested in purchasing homes, or anyone who's interested in owning parcels of land, where we can advise them that, former site of Mercury or risk of health and safety, if, just give them that notice, kind of like you see with, I know a few states have like cancer advisory warnings, something like that, maybe deed restriction, that anyone purchasing the home has to be made aware. Is that an option that we can create as a condition?
Yeah, it is an option. We have I would actually prefer to, instead of conditioning something of a health nature, defer to our county health to help us craft how that would happen or what they'd look. I imagine there'll have to be some sort of disclosure as upon selling a home anyway on a site like that. Should be noted that the Mercury will either be mitigated on site. It's to be under roadways, commercial areas, and moved out of residential. We're starting to see those conditions because we just want to make sure that we're being really careful in this area. We're not grading, not disturbing until we have a really good idea of how we're going to mitigate and get that remediation plan from the county.
Okay, so that's, right now, it's not even an option to do any disclosures, so we're just kind of
Certainly,
deferring to.
it is an option, and it's at the discretion of this commission if they choose to do that.
How would
We
that
can-
work? Would that be, like, what, a deed restriction, or?
You know, I would prefer to have more time to actually think out what would be the proper way and to work with the applicant to make sure we're doing. Once again, I would defer to our county health department and let them help us set the standards of how we're going to approach that instead of trying to take that with this body.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I figured this is going to happen, right? I mean, it's already been approved, but if we can mitigate risk to the public, health and safety risk to the public, you know, how best to do that, and if we can help city council advisory or recommendations, I'd like to do that, but
Certainly, and I understand your concern. This has been very thoroughly investigated, obviously. It's already been through the state. We had there is an approved remediation. We're moving through the county, which has even stricter standards. So city staff will continue to work with the applicant and county health to make sure that the public safety, I mean, obviously is our concern in our protection of welfare. And so we will continue to work to make sure that we're meeting the standards that need to protect the public.
thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from the applicant on that issue as well, if possible.
Yeah, maybe just to add some additional flavor again, Andy Derling for the record. Commissioner, to your point, you know, and as Brooke described it, right? This project already had an approved remedial action plan through Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. They then gave that permitting authority to Washoe County Health Department. And so we're currently going through the process of that final approval with Washoe County Health. It is looking like it will, as Brooke said, become more conservative. And it wouldn't be unusual that there would be some sort of requirement for disclosure that would go with, the purchase documents that would be part of the residences out there. So it's more in the purview of the health department and NDEP rather than the city at this point. But just to kind of give you some flavor on that, that's not an unusual disclosure that would be included in circumstances like this.
Commissioner Galvin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one more question for staff. Brooke, know that you've been involved in the wild horse issue, and Ward 2 Neighborhood Advisory Board is looking at this issue, I think, coming up in the near future. Is this project, not quite sure how to phrase it, but is there any influence with the wild horse discussion and where this particular tentative map is?
So where these two tentative maps are, they are on that western side of Veterans Parkway. When that came in and was established, that was fenced. That is a Nevada revised statute fence to keep the horses out of that property. Additionally, what we're seeing on those approval of those tentative maps on the east side is that before any construction can happen, they need to establish the cattle guards and the fencing. So we're continuing to build fencing to a standard to keep the horses out. The two particular sites that you'll see tonight are not, they're already fenced out and not sort of as impacted. And as we see additional fencing come in and better fencing established and more continuous fencing established, we'll see that improvement on the east side of Steamboat also.
So staff doesn't feel the need for any sort of wild horse related mitigation or conditions?
Well, we
related?
have had that on previous tentative maps, but these two specific ones, being in that sort of city center, we really have dealt with that on some of those exterior eastern Virginia, more on the Virginia range and those foothills. That's where we've addressed those and applied those conditions to ensure that we're protecting the public and the horses.
nothing specific to this tentative map? and
Nope,
the next
the
one?
two
Okay.
tentative maps you'll see tonight wouldn't be specific to any sort of feral horse fencing or any of those conditions.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, we'll move back to the commission for discussion. I guess I just want to touch on, I'm very hesitant for us to put a condition that deals with something that, like requiring notice of Mercury, given that I don't necessarily know where that falls within our purview as a commission. And I haven't necessarily seen enough data to support us permanently affixing something to land that could be detrimental to having people have access to homes. So I'd be pretty hesitant about that. I know that condition was proposed, but that's my concerns with that.
I guess just to respond to that, Mr. Chairman, I think that that it's similar to an issue that we dealt with previously about wanting to have certain standards applied to projects and taking sort of a piecemeal approach as opposed to more of a uniform approach, like for an overall development. I understand where you're coming from, Commissioner Villanueva, on that topic. I guess I would have concern applying it to like this tentative map and the next one, but then not ones that we've looked at previously and potentially not ones in the future. So I guess anything that would be applied to that effect, I would rather see it just personally as part of the PUD itself, as opposed to applied individually to the tentative maps. I don't disagree that it's an important topic to make people aware of. I'm not really familiar or know enough about the mechanisms to get that information out there, whether it's a deed restriction or something else. But I share your concerns on that topic. I just want to make sure that we're consistent in how it's applied.
Commissioner Draglichat, in my realtor experience, I've seen those mechanisms you're looking for in place. I haven't seen one down in this area before, but kind of what you were alluding to is things I've seen where there would be a disclosure. Mostly what I've seen is when someone's, more than likely going to dig a well or access an aquifer, that may be something they need to be aware of before they purchase the property. So I don't know if that applies as much here, but usually, we see these mechanisms in place with or without what we're doing here tonight.
Commissioner Villanueva, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like I said, a lot of this came before I was here. I personally would have probably voted no on a project like this from the outset, but here we are, and I'm have a lot of things that I probably would have recommended sooner, but again, piecemeal isn't really the solution at this point. I know deed restrictions are an option, but again, doing it on one tentative map, part of a larger project, wouldn't necessarily make sense, but I do think this is something we should start thinking about for the future on future projects that come in front of us. I do estate planning. I do a lot of deed work, so I'm very familiar with how deeds work, and I know it is an option. I just, through the public process, I'm not sure how that would work. So, food for thought, I think, moving forward.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Where was I? And I mean, with regard to the housing, I think health and safety is more important than, just getting people in houses. If it's an unsafe living condition with respect to, unsafe water, unsafe, mercury or, potential cancerous conditions, I don't know that just getting people in homes is necessarily the answer if the condition is detrimental to their health.
Thank you. And Commissioner Waver, I'm with you on that. I would struggle. The record here is what we've had presented, and there's nothing in the record before this commission that speaks to Mercury. I understand at prior meetings there may have been a discussion. I think in the future, if we're going to do that, I'd want to see like evidence in the record or some evidence at a hearing, just because I'd be afraid of a decision like that getting overturned.
Oh, it says it sorry, my apologies, I don't mean to cut you off. It is in the, information regarding Mercury is in the, application, background,
Okay.
but I'm good with all my comments. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Johnson, one of the things I heard tonight, which I think was maybe better articulated than I heard in the past, when these larger PUDs come through, there's a lot of requirements in there for additional review entities or additional permits. I think we've heard a lot, and I actually appreciated Commissioner Villanueva asking the applicant to walk through the CLOMAR process. I think that was good. Because when we see these, when we come in, there's a lot of requirements that, they've got to coordinate with the fire department. They've got to coordinate with the Corps of Engineers. They've got to coordinate with, the wetlands and everything. And receive, wildlife was a big one. The wild horse is an issue. Where at the PUD level, there's a lot of discussion about these permits have to be in place prior to any certificate of occupancy or final mapping or any number of different stages. But what I heard tonight that was very interesting for both of them was that, this requirement for the environmental has actually changed since the PUD was put in place. It's now a different entity that's responsible for it. There's different requirements that are there. And I guess the way I would look at it is those are going to be in place, I would say, essentially retroactively on everything that has happened out there because there's still this approval in order to, have occupancy. And maybe the request that I would have, and it's not so much a condition, but a request maybe of staff is to keep this commission apprised of what those requirements are when that, once Washoe County Health as the permitter or authority having jurisdiction over that has completed their review and their requirements, that information be included to us on subsequent tentative maps, because I think you said there's 3,000 more available. We're going to see projects from this again. And I think maybe to that end, if there is an entity that is responsible for these, I would be curious to hear the ultimate, outlay of not just the PUD requires meeting their requirements, but maybe some information in the next one that comes before us that includes what those are. If that, to your point, it would be interesting to hear, is it deed restrictions? Is it, a change in the mitigation requirements that are there? What is it that is ultimately in place to meet those sort of amorphous requirements that we had at the very beginning when the PUD was looked at? So to me, I appreciate this discussion, and I think having heard that, I would be curious or maybe request that of staff moving forward, that we kind of be kept up to speed on, yes, it's received Washoe County Health approval. These are the requirements that go forward based on that. So that would be my comments there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. I think that, I understand the packet talks about, mentions that there's a Mercury remediation plan, but everything in the packet, everything we've heard during this hearing says that it will work. So maybe that would help kind of address what in my mind would be evidence, is if there's evidence saying, here's why it will not work, I understand why we take that into account, and that might be helpful, but at this point, I think we're in a spot where maybe we should hear that stuff in the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Exactly. It's like we don't have it now, but again, I heard something different tonight than what I've heard before that was specific as to the entity and the process. So in the future, if we can get not just, it's been approved, but maybe these conditions were thrown on there or something, just as background on, what's coming forward. To your point, just to understand, same way that we did with the wild horses. I mean, we've had a ton of, recommendations on wild horses subsequent to the approval of this that, are being put into place. Understanding where those are with respect to upcoming tentative maps, I think is a good discussion, whether it's, available in the packet or, moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. There's no further discussion. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please.
In the matter of LDC 22-00025 Daybreak PUD Area 20C, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I recommend that the Planning Commission approve this tentative map subject to the conditions, and I can make the findings.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Commissioner Gower will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item 5.5, case number LVC 22000026, Daybreak PUD Area 21. Andy, thank you.
Thank you again, Andy Drilling for the record. Pleased to be back in front of you. This one is for Village 21, so we do have obviously some duplicative slides here, so I won't spend the time to go through a lot of these. This is for Village 21, so it is the village in the southeast kind of quadrant of the town center, so it's on that northwest corner of Veterans Parkway and South Meadows Parkway. Consists of 109 lots. Again, with some pushing and pulling of the planning areas here, the commercial district got a little smaller in this case. The open space actually on the east side got quite a bit bigger. There's more open space in this than what was originally contemplated. Again, there's lots of different reasons why. There's some grading considerations that go into that, grading and drainage considerations. But ultimately what skip ahead, you will see is, what we've tried to do along, and I didn't note it on the last one, but to Commissioner Villanueva's questions on the previous case, along Veterans Parkway on the opposite side of the street, on the east side of the street is the multi-use path. We've tried to mimic kind of another open space corridor and mirror that on the other side with a pathway system that connects into South Meadows, and then you've got a nice, landscaped pathway that will go along this entire side of the project. We also in this, you'll notice on both of these projects, they are more of a traditional neighborhood design, so it's more the gridded streets, rectilinear roadway patterns. And so with that, introducing that into areas where there's, curvilinear roads, you end up with, kind of some greater landscape areas as well that would be provided in this area here on the north side of South Meadows Parkway. One thing I did want to note, these again are that missing middle product type, a little bit larger lots than the previous one. They're a little deeper, but it provides those smaller homes that are hitting that missing middle portion, which was identified in numerous housing studies regionally as a missing piece of the housing stock here in the northern Nevada. I did want to point out, there is. And I believe Brooke will present on this, but we did recommend a condition and a modification to this location here. So in the planning of this, there was a need for a secondary access for this subdivision to get out to South Meadows Parkway. So that was always kind of in the plan. But the way it ultimately got shown in the tentative map was to use this future commercial driveway. So it would be a right-in, right-out commercial driveway that would serve this future commercial. But the way we showed it was kind of confusing and really makes it seem like this is a roadway connection, and it shouldn't be. It wouldn't make sense for a local street to access a commercial driveway there. So it should be a gated emergency access only. We submitted a revised exhibit to staff, and I believe it would be appropriate that a condition is added to that to address that, just to make sure we're all as transparent as possible with that. And with that, since we covered a lot of it on the previous one, I'm happy to answer any additional questions that the commission may have.
Thank you. Brooke?
Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. Once again, Daybreak project, 980 previously approved, all reviewed under the PUD handbook. RMC were applicable. Once again, we're looking at a denser product, looking at the 11 units. Even though the lots are a little larger, we're still looking at about 11 units per acre on that. Down in this is basically the corner of South Meadows and Veterans Parkway. Overall general design, very similar in architecture to the previous project you saw. Traffic and access, I think we discussed that before. The main one, and I have another slide, we'll discuss that emergency vehicle access and a proposed condition on that to ensure that we're securing that and then protecting that future commercial access there. Just want to hit on that environmental one more time. As staff continues to work with Washoe County Health, the applicant on this, I will certainly be the staff or make sure that we certainly get the concerns of this body over to our Washoe County staff and help to incorporate that within their remediation plan and what we want. We'll come back forward with you next time. Come back forward. I'll let you know where that is. Continue to provide feedback and input on that, and make sure that you're aware of that. I know that's one that staff takes very seriously, and we have to concern and make sure that the public has a good understanding of that. Same phasing and infrastructure, they all have to stand together, and then looking at that master plan conformance. So the exhibit on the left there is showing that drive access, emergency access. What will be proposed is there will be a gate there. We will have a private drive and then go into G Street. So it's a private drive for 93 and 94, lots 93 and 94. What that will do is provide that secondary access, but ensure that commercial access is not interrupted by that neighborhood traffic in the future. I would propose this condition is recommended. Prior to the approval of a final map, the applicant shall provide plans that demonstrate that a portion of Street G serving lots 93 and 94 is designed as a shared driveway and limited to gated emergency vehicle access from the adjacent commercial parcel, that is parcel planning area 22. An emergency access easement shall be established on the shared private driveway. That's just to ensure that isn't blocked, that vehicles can always move through that area, and that private area is maintained as an easement through there. With that, staff recommends the approval of the tenement based on the compliance with the applicable findings and subject to the conditions proposed and listed in the staff report. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to the commission for disclosures. Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Johnson received and read emails, corresponded with the applicant's representative, and previously visited the site.
Commissioner Drakic read and received emails and familiar with the site.
Commissioner Villanueva read emails and visited the site.
Commissioner Munoz, I'm familiar with the site.
Commissioner Gower previously visited the site, communicated briefly with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Valto, same disclosures. Excellent song. Michelle, is there any requests? We'll open up public comment. Are there any requests to speak forms, Michelle?
I did not receive any request to speak forms. We did receive correspondence that was forwarded to the Planning Commission and has been entered into the record. Sorry, the correspondence was in opposition, and no voicemails were received.
Thank you. Would anyone in the public like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, we'll come back. We'll close public comment. Come back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Andy, I think, on this one. Maybe a follow-up to staff. Andy, if we could pull up the site plan that has the lots on it. And the question is, on the west side where those lots are abutting the future commercial, what's the intention? And maybe from your perspective as an applicant, what's being proposed along that lot line essentially? And then maybe I can follow up with Brooke just to get an understanding of how staff is looking at this with this phase versus subsequent phase.
Sure. So you're, if I'm maybe interpreting your question more towards buffering between commercial and residential.
Thanks for that interpretation. Yeah, it wasn't super clear with the question.
That's all right. I think the anticipation would be, there'd be a solid wall along that boundary to give that, kind of more extra level of sound attenuation. It is worth kind of noting, we have tried to limit the amount of walls and fences through daybreak, really because, when you look at master plan developments over the last 20, 30 years, especially even looking, adjacent to this in the South Meadows area, a lot of them tend to turn their backs to the main roads and they're not very open. So you'll see, along the, Veterans Parkway here, we've got roads opening up. So your views are going to be into the site of houses. So it, more aesthetically pleasing to the overall community as a whole. But in this instance, adjacent to the commercial, no, a wall would be appropriate there.
Okay. Thank you, Eddie.
Sure.
I'm just going to follow up with Brooke and ask, when you look at this, Brooke, from the perspective knowing that there's residential being proposed under this tentative map, it's adjacent to future commercial, are you looking at this as there's nothing there now, so from, residential development perspective, we're okay, basically the things that Andy was talking about, there's no need for buffering, obviously, because there's nothing there. Do you look at that as part of the future commercial that comes in on that parcel and how it interacts with the residential that would have already been, if it is approved tonight, approved?
Sure. Certainly, we look at that at what's going to be that established residential pattern, right? We know that commercial is not going to go away because we have those standards within the handbook that ensure that we're not going to come in for a zone change. We're not, or it would be a PUD amendment to modify that in the future. So that's this body, Planning Commission, and City Council again. And so with that, knowing that future commercials coming in, what we would do is when that is proposed at that time, we're looking at those residential adjacency standards. We're looking at screening. We're looking at buffering. We're looking at hours of operation. We start to look at all of those to ensure that we minimize that impact on those adjacent residential properties. A solid wall being established in there would be anticipated between those properties to mitigate light glare, noise, and additional things that come with commercial development.
Right. But again, as part of our decision tonight, we understand that that's part of the handbook, that use is anticipated there, but we're not concerned with that as part of the decision because it's going to be considered as part of that future proposal if and when it comes.
And that's the appropriate way to look at when that development comes in, that we know what's going to happen, we know what the circulation pattern is, we know the uses that are going to be proposed. At this time, that could be several different ways, it could be formed different ways, and so that would be that's the appropriate time that we're going to start to work with them. Because of that residential adjacency and commercial, that gives it that discretionary review, and then we can start to work with the applicant to ensure that we're mitigating as many of those impacts on those residential neighborhood as possible.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva?
Commissioner Villanueva, for the record, I just want to reiterate everything I said for project LDC 220025.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. Andy, question for you. I want to touch on this, and it's actually in keeping with some of the questions from the previous one. So Commissioner Villanueva basically teed me up for this one. I'm looking at we didn't really talk about this, but you had a conversation about like open space versus some of the floodplain area. It appears from these plans that the edge of the development and the open space there's still some distance from there to Veterans Parkway that is part of, I'm assuming, the right-of-way of the road. Is that, so it looks, and looking at the plan, it talks about that as like flood channel control. Maybe give me a little better description of kind of the transition from your open space to this flood control area to Veterans Parkway.
Sure. Yeah, so, what we have kind of colorized here is obviously on-site, the white, kind of black and white portion. To the east here is off-site, it's in the Veterans Parkway right-of-way. So yes, there is a large area, if I were to have to guess, it's probably, 60 to 80 feet. And currently in there is, a drainage swale that's picking up, drainage coming off of Veterans Parkway. So the Veterans Parkway is, designed as, kind of a highway type roadway, major arterial, so there's no curb and gutter along there, and so the the roadside drainage there is being picked up in that in that swale, and so we would sit above that and then grade down to that, and there would be the open space here would probably slope towards that as well. Everything internal would be captured in storm drain system, on-site storm drain system, and then routed to appropriate places.
And so then from a vegetative standpoint, you're not planting anything beyond the limits of your project, but there's a different entity that would be responsible for anything whether it's the noxious weed removal or just control of that adjacent area.
Sure, and driving this daily, multiple times per day, RTC as part of their kind of, I think, closeout with the city is, as part of the, ongoing maintenance and establishment of revegetation and things like that. They've had their contractor out there doing work along the roadsides as well as, in Steamboat Creek on the other side, working to establish that vegetation. My understanding, it would just be a revegetated state on this side. We would not be touching it. It would just be, kind of common drainage for just small portions.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Chair, one more question for applicant. And this is touching base on what Commissioner Gower was looking at. It appears, I know we're not looking at anything for the future commercial center, but obviously there's been, you've looked at both sides of that. I'm seeing, at least in the plan that we have here now, the grades for the building pads are 6 feet plus higher than the existing grade of that commercial center. So to Commissioner Gower's point, have you looked at comparative elevations to that site in relation to this? I mean, it seems flat out there now, but obviously now we've got a 3-to-1 slope shown at the backside of this. Is it anticipated to build that up to a similar level as the development we have here?
Yeah, effectively what you're seeing there is the commercial being left at native grade with the tentative map grading, right? I mean, the tentative map, whatever the subdivider coming in, the builder to build that, is going to grade and fill the commercial site. That would happen in the future. So what you have shown there is just catch to natural right now. And then in the future, when the commercial comes in, it would raise up to a similar elevation to the residential.
Okay, so kind of your overall way of looking at it, because you've obviously looked at the grading of the roadway to the west of there, that grade is not going to be maintained at the lower elevation.
No, so I mean, all of Daybreak, especially this portion is going to be coming up, a few feet. So what we have shown, again, just, trying to make these subdivisions, these tentative maps stand on their own, right? We're just showing the grading infrastructure that's required to serve it. The future commercial coming in, we do have, I mean, kind of as an aside, right? Obviously, as part of the CLOMA, as part of the other permitting processes that we're going through, we have mass grading plans for the entire thing at this point. And so, yes, everything comes up. It will be relatively flat, kind of on similar elevations.
Okay, so just keeping that in mind moving forward, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if maybe
Thank
while
you,
I'm
Mr.
up
Chair.
here, Mr. Chairman, just to maybe add on to Commissioner Gower's questions, the wall along the residential property line, probably appropriate, obviously, to be put in, I would say, with the subdivision or whoever comes first. When we come in with a commercial center in the future, we'd be looking at other types of mitigation, so, light standards, shielding of the lights, things like that, which are going to be obviously, specific to the commercial center whenever that design comes in. So it's a little bit here, a little bit there. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please.
In the case of LDC 00026 Daybreak PUD Area 21, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I recommend that Planning Commission approve the tentative map, subject to conditions. Brooke, was there an additional condition on this one?
Yes, Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. There's a condition 16, which applies to that emergency gated access and easement.
And thank you, including that condition as well.
Great, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Commissioner Drackich, I second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. We'll now move on to item number 5.6, case number LDC 22-00022, Rio Wrangler Elementary School. Do we have a presentation from the applicant? Oh,
This one was pulled.
perfect. Moving on to item number 5.7, case number LDC 22-00016, Stone Village Multifamily. Do we have a presentation from the applicant?
Good evening, planning commissioners. For the record, John Munson with Venture Engineering. We're the civil engineers on the project. John Krimpatic with KLS co-authored this application, and unfortunately John couldn't be here tonight. I do have with me the owner-developer, Stephen Cromer, as well as the builder, representatives of Alco Construction. And Alco is actually doing the architecture, designing all the buildings for this thing in conjunction with the owner. So where's my PowerPoint?
Use the mouse or the keyboard,
What am I pushing?
the arrows on the keyboard.
Oh. Okay. No mouse, yeah. So here's our site right here. We've got the freeway, Parr Boulevard up here, Gardella Avenue, and here's our site right here. This is existing apartments, all single family here, University Ridge. It's an infill. We have, these two apartment complexes were built in 2002. These homes here in 2014 on University Ridge. That's I'd say the newest phase of University Ridge. Probably goes back to like 2006 or something. So this has been a vacant parcel for some time. So it is considered infill, and it's just, the right time as parcels start to develop around town. These infills are going to eventually become something. The zoning, MS zoning, I'm sorry, but the whole surrounding area up here is all the same zone, and it's all allows for the multifamily development. It doesn't have a maximum density, but we're within the master plan recommendations of 30 units per acre. So there is no density cap in the zoning, then the default back to the master plan. Multifamily neighborhood for the master plan, mixed neighborhood here, single family here. So we fit right in with the other apartments that are already there. And of course, this MS was in the new zoning, so this site was, planned to be what it is. Our site plan, if you can look at our site plan versus like the surrounding neighborhood, you can see it fits in pretty well. The brown buildings, our buildings are not much bigger than these existing apartments. They're more long and skinny. We're a little, wider footprint, maybe not as long. These are 3-story buildings. We are putting in 4 stories, but we have 3-story buildings here adjacent to residential, which that's how the master plan and the residential adjacency standards say to start with your lowest profile buildings next to the residential and graduate up to your taller buildings. So that's what we're doing. These are garden style apartments next door. So they're 3 stories with more of a pitched roof. We have 4 stories with a flat roof. So in terms of building height, we're not that much different than the traditional garden apartment of the past. Definitely, we are modern. This is going to bring a modern element into this neighborhood. Some of the oddities about this parcel is right here, and you can see why Mountain View Estates, they stopped building here. They stopped building over here. There's power lines back here, underground gas mains, 2 overhead power lines. One's a transmission line that runs right through here, and then just a normal KV line that runs right here, and then some gas mains run down in here. So we've got with NV Energy, and they said, you're fine to put parking in there, and we can enter into agreement with them to build carports. So we are proposing some covered parking in there. And again, we'll have an agreement with NV Energy, but we wouldn't need any agreement to put parking in there. their easement allows for any reasonable use that they consider to be reasonable. So we've got with them ahead of time, obviously, and said, hey, we need to put parking in there. Right here is the easement. So we had to put all our buildings in this half, some parking over here, and open space. So we got open space here, which I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But we've got a center amenity area, pool, bocce ball, all sorts of, pool, spa, splash pad, everything you can want in here. Plus the ground floor of these two buildings are all indoor amenity space. So this whole front section here is all pretty much amenity on the ground level, all amenities for the apartment owners. So there's actually no units in the bottom floors of these two buildings, the front half. Then we have the current plan. Right through here, we have somewhat of a topographic feature. It has some small rock outcrops. It's got some topography. So in accordance with the hillside development, we have to retain some natural features. So we actually have carved out this space, which has everything that this parcel has in terms of the rock outcrops, the topography, natural vegetation, and views. And we have a slide here coming up that'll show you the views. So everything from right here, somebody can enjoy and know that this is how the parcel used to look. For the most part, the whole parcel is the historic value of it is retained in this area right here. This right here is basically all cut up with power line roads right now. And so what we're gonna do is revegetate it and put in a walking path and trees. And there's no overhead lines here, so we'll be allowed to put the trees in. So you don't see too many trees here. Right here is the transmission main. We can't put any trees there. And then we're actually putting our parking underneath this power line because we can't have any trees. So we're, there's like 300 trees on this site, and we had to put them all here and here. Normally, we'd be able to put some in here, but that's why it looks the way it does. Let's see here. So that's a landscaping plan, which always seems to be the focus of these plans. The engineering plans are not that pretty to look at sometimes, but that's the formal landscape in the center. And again, these buildings have landscape amenities on the ground floor. So pretty much the hub of all activity is gonna go on in here. You wanna get away from that, you come out here, you can reflect on things out here in a natural setting, or you can get some exercise down here and just walk. So you've got, the best of both worlds, I think, in this project for recreation and amenities. We've got, ample parking around the buildings. And really the only remote area is kind of this parking is a little more remote than you would expect. But we do have these paths cut through where you're there. I mean, obviously these two buildings will probably be assigned to most of these spaces, and you just walk right through there. And then right here, where's the other one? I'm gonna mess that one up. But originally we had this all parking, and we decided in review with planning that it was probably a good idea to try to retain this rather than have more parking. We did have like 140, 30% of required. Now we have 104% of required parking. So we're still meeting the requirement. We just don't have a tremendous excess. Now, could we put more parking in? We could put more parking down here. Getting with the owner, he's the one who operates apartment complexes here in town, and in his experience, he feels we don't need to get that aggressive with the parking and be putting it down here. So we left that native for now. I suppose it's an option maybe to come back if we found we had to put some parking in there, future time. So this was the exhibit from the natural landscape area. And this might be a little busy, but it has a purpose. So each one of these pictures, we are looking at the area, standing here, looking at this, that's what you see. So standing here looking at, that's what you're looking at, is a natural feature. It does have the transmission main pole, but that is actually the natural feature of the site. You got two of those big poles, and it runs through that whole corridor down there. And so everyone who lives next door, these folks here in University Ridge, that's what they've always looked at, is those power lines. But we're at least not taking this away. We're still gonna keep this feature for them to look at, and it's always gonna be there. Same with the residents of the property. So just try to give different perspectives. So now, what do you see when you're there? You look out and you see the views. It's maybe hard to see right here, but you can see there's really nice views of the mountains and of, Reno, Northwest Reno from this area. And that's also part of the master plan policies is open space should retain natural features and views are one of them. And we are definitely preserving the views that this site has. This area probably has the best views. All this open space has the best views of the whole site. So we're preserving that. So there's some better pictures. Yeah, so there's the views. I mean, you're walking around that trail or sitting right here, you're looking at all that, and it's very beautiful. So, but you can see that it's not much with the roads and everything. It does need some improvement, and so we are going to be grading that, filling some of it, and putting a path in. We will have the power line road easement maintained. I don't know how much it'll get used, but it won't look like this. So whatever the power company has to do, we'll make sure they can not destroy our landscaping. So again, that's what we're preserving. It has elements of the natural land. This is basically all preserved. Where I was just talking about, we wouldn't get aggressive putting more parking. That would be right here. So we're leaving that alone too. And there's just a blow up of the landscape area where we have, it's pretty, state of the art, everything that anybody's gonna want. It's gonna be pretty busy. That's why I think if you wanna get away from the noise, you have to go to one of the other open spaces. This is the modern looking building that we have. And, it's 4-story, but it's not, it's not huge. It's got the flat roof. And again, if I just put the 3-story with a pitched roof, I'd be like right here. So for all intents and purposes, it's a fairly good fit for the site. It's really open. Everything's open, so that like the stairwells are open to the outside. Lots of breezeways, natural air. The whole thing is very innovative with the way it's been designed. So the corridors inside the building are open. So they're not a hallway like a hotel room. It's all open to the outside except for the roof. But you have fresh air coming in everywhere. This is required cross sections for grading, which we've done. So I'd have to go to that point. So let's see. This here would be section B, which we start at the existing residential, and we go through the 3-story, over across the 2 4-stories, and then over to the apartments. So section B is down here. We got a little bit of fill, which we're putting in, and then we're putting the 3-story building, and then we step up to, we're actually doing a lot of retaining on the site to step the site up. So we're actually, these residential homes have a 6-foot fence, and they're 2-story. So they're probably this high. And then we're filling a little bit, putting the building to hide the rest of the fill, which is we're building up the street to make these buildings higher, stepping up again. We're trying to step these things up because that's what the site dictates. Our roads are not really flat. They're like 3% and 4% streets. And the hillside, we're doing the best we can to adapt this site to, it's not really a hillside. A hillside criteria is more than an average of 10%, more than 10% slope. We have 11% average slope. A hillside development, you would expect to be a hillside where you put houses on the hillside where the average slope might be 20, 25%. For the most part, our site is all green. And there is a slope map in the application. You can see most of it's green. That's 0 to 15%. Totally considered developable land. I'll go to the grading plan. So this footprint, and it actually is a footprint, which when I looked at that, I go, you couldn't have planned that. So our footprint of cut, that's where we're cutting more than 20 feet. And that's basically the top of the hill that's there. We're cutting that down about 20 feet, putting a lot of that dirt down in here, under the roadways. We are somewhat mass grading, but we're still stepping those buildings to reduce, cut, and fill. But we just can't reduce it. You saw that outcrop, that hill. So that right there is kind of what we're doing here. We have to cut down some of that in order to put our site in, but we wanted to save a representative sample, so we're not cutting that down. So just to know about the sections. Oops. This section shows you what we're doing through the power lines. So we got our buildings, again, stepping right here, stepping up between these buildings. Going down from our Gardella, we're down here, stepping up, and then we're just, you can see we're cutting. So that's existing ground there, we're cutting right here. We're not really cutting over here at all, we're cutting down here though. And then we're just almost meeting grade down here and then putting a little bit of fill down here in that trail system that I showed you. So that's the big transmission main. That is the 25 kV line. Again, the transmission main runs right through here. We're not putting anything under there, although we probably could. We're not. So again, that's another corridor where people can, use it just like this. So it's just gonna be left native. Just didn't feel like people want to look up and see those. They're going to look up and see them anyway, but not right under them. Not right over them. And that concludes my recommendation. If you have any questions, I'll be here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Do you have a staff presentation?
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Grace Whited, Assistant Planner for the record. I'm here to discuss the multifamily development on Gardella. John did a great job of kind of giving a comprehensive look at what they're doing, and so I'll try to fill in where I can. So the 11.46 acre site is located on the south side of Gardella Avenue, east of its intersection with Coastal Street. The applicant is requesting a major site plan review for hillside development and grading resulting in cuts deeper than 20 feet in depth. Approval of this request will result in 300 unit multifamily development. The key issues identified were site and building design, grading, and protection of natural or sensitive areas. So the current zoning for the site is mixed use suburban, which as John mentioned, does not have a density maximum. The single family to the south and west are separated by somewhat of a grade change, and the properties to the south, do have a significant open space buffer. And there are two similar apartment complexes to the north and east of this project. So this is the proposed site plan. I turned it, as John did, to make it fit the screen a little bit better. So Gardella is on the left-hand side of your screen, and then those homes to the west are on the bottom right here. And so as you can see, these are the buildings that will be at 3 stories, and the rest of the site will be developed at 4 stories to help that transition from the lower density single family to the higher density multifamily. And the buildings to the single family to the west of the site, there is a condition in the staff report that requires there to be separation with 2 rows of columnar trees. And this separation is about 30 feet. And John touched on the amenities. Those are concentrated to the middle of the site, and then we have our open space to the south. These 2 cross sections are a little difficult to see. John touched on them and talked about them in detail. I think that they show a good transition of the height. So the single family is over here, and we have the 3 stories transitioning into a higher grade, and the 4 stories and more central to the site. Here are some proposed elevations for the site, and this kind of shows the architectural compatibility with the rest of the multifamily in the area. So as I just stated, it is compatible with the multifamily projects adjacent to it. Here's a street view of kind of what that looks like. These are developed at about 3 stories, but a similar kind of product. These are the major site plan review findings that staff and the commission has to make for this project. Staff can make all of the applicable findings and recommends approval. Here's the recommended motion, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. We'll come back to the commission for disclosures. Start with Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Johnson, I received and read emails and familiar with the site.
Commissioner Dracula read and received emails.
Commissioner Villanueva, I have visited the site this afternoon, and I don't believe I got any emails, so I think that's it. That's my disclosure.
Commissioner Williams, I'm familiar with the site.
Commissioner Gower, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Valto, read and received emails and familiar with the site. We'll now move on to public comment. Michelle, did we receive any public comments? Any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive a request to speak forms. I did receive correspondence, but it was neutral. They had questions relating to when this project was breaking ground, and no voicemails were received.
Thank you. Would anyone in the public like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, we'll close public comments. Back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Munoz?
Thank you, Commissioner Williams, for the record. This is going to be for staff. And I want to apologize. I keep pulling up a staff report from the city site, and my laptop and my iPad keep crashing. I want to ask you about the Reno Police Department and what their response was to the rear of the property, or if there was any response to the rear of the property. They do have some concerns there with that open space area, and then all the parking in the back, and some of it is going to be shielded from the public or from the buildings. So at nighttime is kind of my concern there. I wonder if that was addressed at all with the police department.
Yeah, so we send out, Grace Whited, Assistant Planner for the record again, we send out these applications through a development review memo, and I think all of you guys received that. We did not receive comments from the police department on this specific application.
Okay, then we'll go to the applicant, and I'll ask you kind of the same questions there. Is there going to be some type of security in the area, or cameras or lighting in that back area? I know Gardella does have some issues on that street in that area. It's kind of common up there. So I'm wondering how you guys are going to mitigate that, or what's going to be done to make sure those things don't happen on property.
Yes, for the record, John Munson, Venture Engineering. The whole site is lighted, and in the application, there was a lighting plan. So we do have lights all down there. I can't speak to this. There will be security. I don't know about cameras. I could maybe ask the owner for a nod on that. Would you mind if he spoke?
No, please.
Oh, yeah? Okay, thank you.
Hi, Steve Cromer, developer and owner. So part of what we would do, we'd do cameras, and then we also use this company for remote monitoring. So they monitor all the cameras, and then if they see anything, then they have a direct line to the sheriff or the RPD. And then we also have a couple times a night, like on-site drive-by security. So we own, 14 other properties in town, so we got a pretty good handle on how to keep the security tight on the sites.
Okay, and then since you're there, actually, one more question for you is, are these going to be apartments for rent, or is these going to be like condominiums for sale?
They're just apartments for rent.
Apartments for rent, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Johnson?
And I look up and you're just staring
I
at me.
didn't mean to pressure you into questions.
You did, man. Actually, I do have a question. I think I'll ask this one of the applicant. John?
Yes.
I'm looking at I appreciate the step down to the 3-story, apartments on the west side. I guess my question is one of what's been presented in our report, and see if I'm reading this correctly from the images. It looks like the way that building is oriented, all of the pop-outs and the architecture that you were showing in the 3 dimensions are faced internal to the site. And the side facing the houses, if I'm reading this elevation right, is nothing more than walkways with railings. And I guess I'm questioning the orientation of that, because with respect to the neighbors, I would much rather have the windows in the architecture side facing them so that the essentially blank wall with the doors is internal to the site, because to me, it's a very harsh elevation to be putting to the neighbors. So I guess I'm pretty sure I'm reading it right. I keep looking back and forth, so I guess I'm asking for a little bit of explanation as to why that's the approach that's being presented here.
Well, I think that the activity of maybe not the look of it, I'm sure there's something that can be done with the look of it, but in terms of privacy, not having all those windows facing the residential was the idea. And that really you're just coming and going from your unit and not, having your windows open where people are looking back and forth. So I think that was the intent of facing them inward towards the rest of the complex and towards their own parking. So they're looking at the parking. I think there might be something we could do with the architecture over there.
I think you've got some people behind you that are making some noises,
Okay,
so
yeah,
maybe
'cause
if
they designed the
please,
building,
no,
so.
please come to the
wanna-
thing and state your name and kind of respond to that, if you would.
Bob Herman, Alco Construction. The reason exactly what John said, that, we really took into consideration those homes. And, I'm a lifetime resident here, and we drew it. And we really took into consideration the residents, and that we didn't want someone standing there looking into their backyard, because I know I wouldn't want that myself. And so that's why we did it that way. And everything else is like looking in to the pool area, took into consideration all the people around us. So that's why that is like that.
Okay, so then I guess the follow-up to that is, from an architectural standpoint, I'm basically seeing 12 doors and a wall. I'll be honest with you, it looks like a Motel 6 facing those houses, and I don't like that. I think there's a softening of that needs to happen for residential compatibility, because it's a 3-story wall that's already elevated above the houses, that I guess just architecturally, I understand what you're saying with respect to people looking down into their backyard. However, that's more of the residential side of that building, is the windows for the people that are there. So
the theme, it matches the rest of the theme in the area. And then we took a modern look for the rest of it. But if you want us to try to break that up somewhat more, I guess we could, but that's what we took into consideration. I mean, we took that area to match the area around us. We modernized everything else to have it within our design inside of our apartments.
Well,
But
again, and
we can.
I appreciate the design that you've done and looking at, and I appreciate the rendering. I wish the rendering would have been part of the package so that I wasn't just looking at elevations. So I appreciate.
You don't
architecturally what
have the
you're doing.
rendering?
It wasn't a part of the images that I was looking at here. So like I said, I appreciate seeing it there. It matched what I was seeing in the elevations. I'm just concerned that the only elevation in this entire project that's not that architectural approach is the one immediately adjacent to the neighbors.
And
So-
that's
And I understand that it was intentional.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the explanation. I think I'll, save the rest of the comments for discussion in here. So I appreciate
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you for your time.
And just like, just
Thank you,
add
Mr.
to that, the trees and stuff that we have over there, the double rows of trees, so it is gonna help break it up. But I think they have a great architect on staff that would certainly take those, recommendations into
And I
consideration.
did see there's definitely some setbacks there and some planting in the open space that we would be looking for. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could follow up on that, because that's a key concern of mine too, Grace. Can we actually put up the profile view of that western elevation too? It's that view there.
The cross-section
Yeah,
or the?
thank
yeah.
you, the cross-section. So on that top image there, so as Commissioner Johnson mentioned in his questions, comments, I'm understanding that the base of that building is essentially 10 feet above the existing grade where the residents are. So we're looking at from the base grade to top of the building, a difference of almost 50 feet?
I believe, yeah, 45 to 50 if I calculated it correctly.
What is staff's understanding in terms of the height of the landscaping that's being proposed, even at maturity?
So the condition, Grace Whited for the record, the condition, that was one of our main concerns when looking at this, and that's why we required the 10-foot minimum columnar evergreen trees so that they will grow tall and they'll help break up that height difference, and it's 30 feet in width. So we have plenty of room for 2 rows of those trees to stagger, so that it when you look out your window, there's not a building, but you see trees as opposed to a 40-foot building.
And I've asked this question before on other projects because this is a key determinant in terms of whether that we can meet that particular finding related to compatibility with the existing development. Is what mechanism do we have as a city to ensure that those trees that reach maturity and that they remain in place to provide that screening?
Because it's a condition, we would have the ability, if they removed those trees, they would no longer be complying with the condition. So code enforcement, if they got a complaint, could go out there, require them to replant the trees and make sure that they're in healthy condition. They do have to be maintained as part of the approval. And so that's the mechanism we would have in place to enforce that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Grace.
Grace, actually, this question might be better for the applicant. Did you get in contact with any of the neighbors? So when Commissioner Johnson was talking about this, the building style facing the houses, was there any communications with the neighbors who would be seeing that side of the building?
We didn't. We did have, attend the NAB, and there really wasn't any discussion on that. I don't know that any of the neighbors came to the NAB, but, so we did not have discussions with them.
But no one spoke out against
No.
the project?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Chairman, I don't have any questions, but I do want to engage in discussion when you're ready.
Let's do that. Commissioner Villanueva?
So during disclosures, I mentioned that I did visit the site today. And I'm glad that I did because it was going up that steep slope to the property site was very icy and very dangerous. And then it only got more dangerous towards the project site. But as I was pulling in, there was kids, because there is a lot of apartments in the area, lots of children coming in from school, trying to get up this icy slope where it was what I found to be very dangerous. So I don't think, I know one of the factors that we have to consider is compatibility with the surrounding developments. I don't know that just because the developments are there, that they were ever compatible. I mean, had I been there, I probably would have voted no on those developments. So I don't know that that creates an innate sense of, you know, we need to determine whether this project is compatible with those projects, if I don't believe that those projects were ever compatible with the area. So I did want to bring that up. And I have other comments, but I'll wait to see what you all think.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a comment that my concern particularly relates to our first finding under the tentative map, the proposed design is compatible with surrounding development. I understand the condition that we have in there with the 20-foot trees. My concern is that, I mean, we see these developments all across the city, and even when you have that difference between a single-family residence and a 3 or a 4-story building, even if it's across a roadway and it's buffered by landscaping, you can still see the pretty marked difference there. And we're talking about, you know, less than 50 feet, a 50-foot essentially elevation difference between base to roof line and 20-foot trees. My concern is, frankly, that's not enough, and then that gets compounded by what I'm sure Commissioner Johnson is going to mention with the design elements of the building. I just have a real concern about that compatibility on that western property line. I do also share, Commissioner Munoz, your concerns, and I hope that you bring this up in discussion, because I think it's worthwhile having the conversation about the safety of the just essentially open parking area on that, what is that, south kind of western side of the property. I don't really have any findings that I'm looking at relative to that concern, maybe public safety related to the residents of that area. But that is certainly a concern for me too. So I hope that we can have that conversation also.
Commissioner Munoz?
I'm going to come at this a little bit different, and I actually like the project. I think it is compatible. I think it's actually bringing value to the area. The apartments that are in there now are in a state of disrepair, and I think this really changes the value of the entire area. And I understand what you're saying, how maybe it wasn't compatible, or you don't think it was compatible. A lot of those houses weren't there when those apartments went in. Those apartments were there first, and maybe the houses weren't compatible with the apartments. So maybe it's backwards of the way I see it. I do have a concern with that back parking lot area, but I feel it is being addressed, and I feel that if they do what they say, if the developer does what he says and they go and they have security there, they have lights back there, it can be mitigated. And I believe with the property, the value that it brings to the area, you're not going to see abandoned cars in the back parking lot. You're not going to see vagrants sleeping on the hill. You're not going to see those things that you see at some of the other places nearby. I believe that will kind of push some of that element out. So I'm kind of going a different way with this, and I think this is good for the area, and I do like the project.
Commissioner Draculich, I totally agree with Commissioner Munoz. I actually used to live up there 2002, 2003, and those apartments were there. Low-income housing, student living, it does fit that need significantly. Those houses to the west weren't there. But I would jump right into Commissioner Johnson. They are burdened with finding a way to conform to those single-family residences to the west. And I guess my question for you for discussion, what would you like to see? It's Building 7 and Building 8, because you made a good point. I didn't catch that. And you've just basically the only buildings on this project with basically nothing on the backside. And I understand why they did that. It makes a ton of sense. I deal with that all the time, people wanting to not have someone looking into their backyard is a big deal. I could see neighbors, if they saw that, would actually be the really only complaint coming up. But what would you like to see as something that would help the applicant? Would it be something more like building 5 and 6, where they'd have access and there'd be more units?
Again, you're all staring at me. Thank you, Commissioner Draculich. I'm looking at it some more, and I was, I want to apologize. I think it was an unfair association with a Motel 6 because I'm looking at a two-dimensional elevation, and if anyone up here knows that that's a very challenging thing to make work. One of the things that I'm noticing on this, and I would really be served better with a section or a perspective of this, but what it appears that the building itself, the 3 stories of building that are there are actually sitting back behind what appears to be a pretty substantial walkway. And the walkway does not extend. When you look at the elevation in our packet, the highest point on that building is actually not at the straight edge of that wall. So there are, if you imagine, you've got a ground floor and then access on 2 floors. So basically you're at the 3rd floor line is the highest point of that part that extends out. So it's essentially a walkway there. I guess what I'm looking at on this, and to your point, again, I think I've said it before, I don't want to design from the dais because I do believe that the architecture of this speaks for itself, and I'm not going to try to change that. I guess maybe what I'm looking for on that elevation is a general softening in ways that I've already spoken about tonight. So maybe there's not just a straight line for the walkway. Maybe there's a little bit of in and out. Maybe there's a transition, with, in terms of the railings or the way that it's articulated. Because I think that's what we find so much with residential levels. The residences, single-family residences, by and large, have articulation in them. There's ins and outs. The roof heights are different. And when you put that next to commercial, the transition that you want to do with the commercial is to try to do some of those things. Whether your architecture, we're not doing a sloping roof. If you look on the other side of the street where we have the garden-style apartments, and I appreciate that being brought up, those are 3-story apartments, but they've got a hip roof. So the roof is sloped. There's some ins and outs in the way that it's done. So it looks like a very large house. Here we're responding to an architecture that is not our traditional sense of a single-family residence. So I think that's where we have to maybe push for some modifications that start to reflect that. There's ways that they could do it on the site plan differently. You look at the other side and the roadways against the edge. Here, the roadway's in so that we have the apartments there. And I appreciate the commentary about not wanting the windows. You're absolutely right. 3rd floor, 40 feet above, looking down into somebody's backyard, they're never going to want to have a barbecue with friends there again. So I get the reason for doing that. I just would like to see the architecture maybe reflect that. And again, if it's the fact that that walkway is not, essentially it's a 2-story elevation that butts all the way out there for that walkway, if that can have some articulation, maybe even if there's, some way of breaking that up so that it's not quite so flat, so straight, and so tall. That's what I was looking at with respect to compatibility with the neighborhood. I appreciate Commissioner Villanueva's comments about, the back and forth, but I will say, from a compatibility standpoint, we're also looking at it from a master plan standpoint. We've got a whole area there that's zoned for multifamily. The roadway that goes up there is sized to accommodate that. Whether it's being plowed and has the walkways and everything is a different issue for the city, but from a planning standpoint, this site is intended for a denser level of housing, and it's our responsibility from a planning commission to look at making that as compatible as possible. I think there are some questions. Certainly I've raised some, and I think there have been some others here, but I think looking at it from that perspective, with respect to, what the master plan and the zoning says this site should be with respect to what we as a city want to do, that's what I think we're looking at here. And a multifamily unit project is compatible with that. Now it's just a matter of looking at it with the immediate, how that specific project is compatible with what's adjacent to it. And that's what I'm working my way through here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I agree with you. I think this project is compatible. The surrounding area has apartment complexes and houses. The apartment complexes are effectively the same height. And I think we have to look at compatibility based on what is surrounding now and what's outlined in the master plan. There was no development was ever compatible before there was development. So I don't think we can just say that it wouldn't have been compatible or it shouldn't be compatible. I do struggle with, the reason why I asked if there's any neighborly opposition is because in my mind, the neighbors should be the ones that are expressing opposition to this. And if they were concerned with the way it would look and what they'd have to look at, I'd be more sympathetic to some stylistic concerns. But I don't necessarily know that we should turn down a project because the neighbors might not like it or it might not be aesthetically pleasing when I haven't heard any opposition from the neighbors. And those are the folks I think would be concerned. And I get that there might be a way to design it differently. I'm just hesitant to use that as a basis for denying a project when I think it generally is compatible. So that's my concerns. I'd like to see if there's a condition that maybe the applicant would be amendable to get you, Commissioner Johnson, to feel supportive of this. It just seems, I don't know what it would be. It's kind of
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm not coming at this saying that I'm going, I have issues with the project, but with respect to whether I'm for or against it yet, I think is subject to kind of the discussion and the items that we're hearing here.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously on the one before, I made, some recommendations for a condition. I'm certainly willing to do that in this case as well. The difference here is that it's not quite as straightforward as it was the other. It was a very specific finding that we had to make to alternative equivalency. Here, it's a broader question of compatibility. And so, to your point, you're asking if the neighbors are complaining about the design. I will guarantee you that probably there is not an architect or a designer who lives in that particular street. I have a hard time reading the information that has been presented here. So, to that point, I think it is our responsibility to be looking out for those based on the technical and professional knowledge that we have. So that's why I'm bringing it up. And I'm absolutely happy to, speak with the applicant about some kind of modification that would make me feel more comfortable about what we're going to be seeing there. But I'm doing it based on the overall finding of compatibility with respect to how close we are to what's going on there. So I appreciate your comments, but I think I'm not saying that that's a deal breaker. I'm saying that is how I'm looking at that condition.
Understood. I understand.
And I guess Grace has come up based on this conversation. So is there something that you would be willing to, put out here that maybe can put me out of my misery on this one?
Yes, Grace Whited, for the record, I apologize. I figured I would come up. We do have code standards for articulation. And so for street-facing facades, they have to choose 5 of these standards to meet. And then for non-street facing, they have to choose 3. And these include, changing in materials, colors, height, parapet, windows. And although we do try to encourage them to face windows and openings away from neighboring residences. So they would use different articulation methods, and those are specific to code.
And I appreciate that. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, can I ask a question of the applicant, even though we're in discussion? John? I guess to make this as simple, I've sort of addressed how the height issue is being looked at from this. My question is, and I go back to my initial point, that this elevation does not appear consistent with the rest of the architecture of the project. The rest of the architecture has multiple materials. There's some ins and outs within the existing facade that I'm not seeing on this elevation. I guess my question is, and to put it in this present, is there a condition that would be acceptable and able to be responded to that requires that the materials and articulation along this elevation are similar or compatible with the rest of the architecture of the project?
Yeah, for the record, John Munson. Yeah, absolutely. I think you could, Alco has a great architects on staff, and I really think they moved on from that, and maybe they just need to be told to go back and take a harder look at it, make this look good. And I did forget to mention that we are stepping those, so the existing residents, their street goes downhill, and so our buildings are going downhill too, so that adds some
Actually, John,
articulation.
I would say that's not in concurrence with the elevation that was provided.
Right, and I apologize because we had to add that at the last minute, and I don't think they had their elevation done. So I'm not exactly sure.
That's actually a very critical point of discussion. So the elevation as presented shows the ground floor stepping and the height remaining consistent.
Right, yeah, the
So-
ground floor stepping, the height remains the same.
So is that still the case, or is the height stepping along with the ground floor?
I don't believe that, I don't believe the building height is stepping, just the ground floor, which I
Okay.
guess they wouldn't see.
Okay.
But I think the upper walkways, yeah, so maybe that's level. Yeah,
Yeah, so
I think the elevation you're looking at is accurate.
Okay.
But like you said, the stairway, the railings and everything are down at one level, and then the roof is up at another level, so you do have
So
that
is there, can
pitch.
you, maybe to answer this question again, to help everybody else out here, based on that elevation, how wide is that walkway from the face of the?
I think it's
building?
just like 5 feet, 5 feet walkway that sticks out. So, absolutely, if you want to condition,
And, well, and let me just follow it up,
articulation.
is that 5 foot, is that at your setback?
The 5 feet is
So
on the
the
setback.
the
and then
face
the
of that
building
is at the
set- The
setback.
front door, the unit
So-
door and window, building face is beyond that, 5
Under-
feet back.
Understood, but if there was pushing and pulling of that walkway to get some of the horizontal, you're saying that you're already at the setback?
I think we have some wiggle room on that, but we could push it in. I think they could lose a little square footage and push it in.
Okay, again,
And push it out.
I'm not designing it, I don't want to design it, I think the design is here and it speaks
Mm-hmm.
well. I'm just concerned that there's a piece of it that doesn't match, and I would like that
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
to
I
be a
think
little
they
more
could
keeping.
vary that in and out, and whether or not we have to push it in the building a little bit to release some square footage, or we can push it out a little bit. There's no real the setback's actually 5 feet, but we have the additional setbacks due to building height, plus we're grading a little bit, so it ends up being 30 feet.
Okay, so Grace, let me ask a question of you, and I'll just say this is the last point. So my proposed condition, and I'm trying to walk as fine a line as I can, but I want to make sure it's something that staff can support, which is essentially a condition about the elevation facing the property to the west be treated with the same level of material and horizontal and vertical horizontal, I'm not going to get into vertical, horizontal articulation, and material changes compatible with the rest of the architecture of the project.
So the only reason I would be hesitant to add that as a condition is because it is code. So we do have compatibility. It has to be similar materials, colors as the rest of the structure. And then they also have those articulation standards. So, we have that built in with code to make sure that whoever is reviewing the building permit is, for any building permit, they have to meet at least 3 articulation standards for this side of the building, and then it has to be compatible with the rest of the structure. And that's code, so it's for any building.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Chairman,
Mr. Chair.
may I? So I want to thank Commissioner Muniz and Commissioner Draculich for your input. I also want to be clear. I don't have anything against the multifamily. I think, it is zoned for multifamily. It is compatible with the other zone multifamily. My concern, just to be clear for the record, is we're reviewing hillside development and grading. Okay, and so when we're looking at that, and the land space, I don't believe it's compatible with that, and given the slopes and the incline. And what I was saying previously, and I wasn't clear, is I don't know that any development should have happened right there, given what I believe to be a danger, particularly given what I saw today. Neither here nor there. I just don't know that we should assume that just because there's multifamily there, that was done properly. I don't know that we have to do that. Maybe we do. So I wanted to make that clear. But given that our review is for whether the hillside development is appropriate, that's really where my concern is. And I'm struggling there, given that I don't think that we need to assume that just because there's other multifamily that, that development on this hillside is appropriate. So that's kind of my position. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Commissioner Jakulich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just touching on it one more time with Commissioner Munoz in regards to the security. That was my first thing that I kind of caught. Sounds like you guys got it handled. You have experience. I would just want it to be noted, focus heavily on that. Obviously, I think you're right, Mr. Munoz, with heavy lighting, more people going in and out. But obviously, someone parking in the back there has a, possibly dangerous walk home and needs to be noted. So it looks like you guys have that covered. I just wanted to touch on that one more time.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or a motion?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just put on the record, I cannot support the project because of finding A under major site plan review without any sort of additional, frankly, I don't think that condition number 10 is enough to mitigate the potential impact on the adjacent residences on that western property line. And just as a point of clarification or just as an example, I mean, we're talking about a 31-foot setback, which is approximately from me to legal counsel. If you put a 10-foot tree between me and Jonathan, and you've got a 50-foot building, that 10-foot tree is not going to do anything. Even if it reaches maturity at 30 feet, you're still going to be impacted by the mass of that building. I don't think that the design with a 3-story building adjacent to a single family with trees is sufficient to meet that particular finding. And Grace, maybe you have something else that I'm missing here.
No, I just was discussing with the applicant's representative. If it would make everyone feel comfortable for that finding, possibly be agreeable to a 2-story product on that side of the development. And I think that would help with the transition and the compatibility and the architecture as well, because you wouldn't have as large of a face. And I could add that into a condition if that's what the body would like.
Thank you, Grace. Mr. Chairman, I've received some information that would certainly impact my ability to make that finding.
I appreciate that. I think I would, if the commission is supportive of that condition, that is something that I think would lead to this project being developed. I'd be in support of that. I personally don't think it's necessary. I struggle with, I think the master plan and the goals of infill and creating more housing really informs how I view each one of these findings. And whenever we have a project that is infill and is, in my view, compatible with surrounding areas, I just struggle to turn that type of project down. I think we need more rental units. Rent is getting insane in Reno, and every time we vote against a project and try to decrease its size, I think we're affecting supply when we need more housing more than ever. So, if the commission is supportive of that condition, and I'm obviously on board with that, but that's kind of explains why how I've understood some of the factors we're supposed to look at.
Commissioner Mooney, for the record. I'm in agreement with everything you just said. I don't think that the west-facing wall of the property is a big enough issue to deny the project. Obviously, the neighbors aren't here up in arms like they were 2 weeks ago, or like they were 4 weeks ago, or like they were 6 weeks ago. So I don't think this is as big as issue as we are making it out to be as a body. But with that being said, if we do go to the 2, and that gets this passed through, I think that's something that we should definitely consider. And at the 3, I'm on board. At the 2, I'm still on board. So I think it's a good project for the area.
Commissioner Drackage, same feelings.
Commissioner, may I?
Please.
I agree in a lot of ways with you. Infill is important and multifamily is important. And I do go back and forth with this site because, again, I don't think that any of that should have been there. And yes, it is infill now, unfortunately, in a place that I don't think it should have ever been, given, the type of community. There's not a lot of public transit up that way. There's other issues. So while I do agree generally with a lot of the concepts you just said, I just don't know that I can find it apply to this particular site.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I was trying to zoom in on something here. I appreciate the comments. I think, a couple of points to make on this. If I'm reading this right, a 3-story to a 2-story drop is a loss of 8 units. There's 4 in each building. So to me, we're tasked with being the planning commission. That doesn't mean that we, can't just focus on one thing. We have to look at the good of everything. And I think that's sort of the approach that we're taking here. And I certainly understand the housing issue, but again, that's where I'm looking at, it's if the reduction of 8 units makes this a more compatible project to existing residential units and existing people in the area, to me, that's the kind of benefit that we should be weighing as a body here. And certainly we're not all going to come down on the same side of that. And I definitely appreciate, I would much rather, have this discussion about 8 units instead of the entire project. And having an 8-unit difference eliminate all of the houses, I think that is definitely speaking to your desire to make sure that we're doing housing. But I do want to say, I do not look at this as an infill project. This is a native piece of dirt that happens to have some development on either side of it. And that development is not dense, it's not served by public transit. And in fact, per the applicant's own explanation, there is part of it that they are leaving in place because it has a native land to it, or, a natural landscape. So, to be looking at this as an infill project, and I appreciate that being said, I don't, to me, an infill project is a space that has development all the way around it with people who are expecting development to happen there. What we hear often is people coming in because this is open dirt that they've lived with for years, and now suddenly something's going in there. And we understand that, but this is not the infill in the way that we're looking at. But it's a great opportunity for multifamily dense development to happen in an area that has an established pattern of that. So I, like Commissioner Gower, are hearing a change in what's being presented here that does definitely impact what I'm doing. And I guess what I was looking at on this elevation is that by dropping 1 floor off of there, plus the the parapet, you're losing about 13 to 14 feet of height of that building. And certainly within the discussion that Grace has already provided, which architecturally I can see some ways around it, but that's because I'm an architect and I've done it before. I didn't say that out loud. But I do think from what we've heard and what the applicant has heard, I think they're hearing where we're going from. So I do think that, to respond to the comments that we've heard tonight, if the applicant is amenable to a lowering of the elevation of those 2 buildings and a reduction of essentially 8 units, gets me much closer to making the findings that I need to make, which I think are, at the end, for a beneficial project. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please do.
Case number LDC 22-00016 Stone Village Multifamily. Based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the major site plan review subject to conditions with the addition of a condition that the two buildings on the western property line will be limited to 2 stories.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Is there a second?
Commissioner Draculich, I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Draculich. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you so much. Good luck with
Wait.
your project.
Mr. Chair,
My
I just
apologies.
wanted to clarify, Villanueva, are you voting nay?
Commissioner Villanueva is a no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a regional planning meeting last week. We had an extremely robust discussion about a power plant project and a slightly more robust project discussion about the movement of a piece of property in Mogul from the Reno sphere of influence to Washoe County sphere of influence, or back to Washoe County. And ultimately, the recommendation was made to allow that to move into Washoe County. And I will state that there was some good discussion that I bring to this body with respect to the differences between different jurisdictional ways of looking at things. And Angela was at the meeting, Angela Foos from the city, and my takeaway in this, and I would allow Commissioner Gower to comment as well, is that some of the changes based on our latest Title 18 update have actually brought some of our review closer to what Washoe County review of projects are. And I think ultimately from a regional standpoint, it's best if the different entities are looking at development with the same level of oversight. And so I was glad to hear that. And I think the level of discussion we had kind of led to that. So I don't know if Commissioner Gower has anything to add to that.
Well said, Commissioner Johnson.
And we don't have another regional meeting until hopefully the end of January.
Great, thank you. Agenda item number 7, staff announcements.
Chris Pingree, Director of Development Services. Staff announcements this go around. City Council met on December 8th, and the text amendment for packaged alcohol beverages was adopted. Let me take that back. The text amendment for packaged alcohol beverage sales was adopted. The next Planning Commission meeting is January 5th. This meeting will begin at 5:30 p.m. The TMRPA will be doing a presentation and update on the regional population and job growth, and public hearings will be noticed for a 6 p.m. start time. Happy holidays to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Move to agenda item number 8, Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items. Commissioner Gower?
Mr. Chairman, maybe I could ask Chris a question. It's my understanding that staff is going to essentially couch the TMRPA item as part of a training or like an educational program for the commission. Is that the idea? So there might be some subsequent topics?
I think so, and this will be the first of a series. So I think this will be the introduction, and then we'll take it from there with direction of where we want to see it. If you do have comment beforehand or some insight or suggestions, we're more than welcome to hear it.
Okay. 2 things, if I could, Mr. Chair. There was one, I know the city just released its greenhouse gas emission tracking. That I contacted Suzanne Gorman because she sent out an email, and I was coordinating with her and Angela. I was hoping that she could come and just give a brief presentation on that GHG tracker. And then I really would like to have some sort of dialogue at the commission level about our purview as it relates to affordable housing.
Both of those have been talked about internally, and Suzanne is planning on coming in January. We're not sure which meeting we're going to get her at, maybe February, depending on where we can get her on an agenda. But yes, the presentation we talked, Angela and I talked today about putting that together for the affordable housing piece to address the body.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
I love that. I was going to ask the same thing, so thank you, Commissioner Gower. Great. No further suggestions. Move on to public comment. Michelle, did we receive any requests to speak forms?
I did not receive any requests to speak forms, no voicemails for this item either.
Would anyone in the public like to speak? Would the officers on the side like to speak? Okay. Thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you so much. We'll close public comments. Entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Perfect. Carries unanimously.